Hey guys. This is part 6 of What If Naruto Died and the Kyuubi Took Over His Body. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 26, Not Good Enough. July 18th, 347 NE, 4:30 p.m. Inside the tower, arena. The second battle of the preliminaries is between Ino Yamanaka of Konoha and Shikamaru Nara of Konoha. Begin! Ino immediately leapt back to avoid Shikamaru's shadow, which lanced out quickly and nearly caught her anyway. She had to jump back twice more to avoid the shadow before it finally halted, quivering in place for a moment before withdrawing. She let out a shaky breath when she saw it retract. He'd improved his range by several feet since the last time she'd seen him use it, and that was without any supplemental shadows. Still, she knew how far he could extend it now. Not gonna be that easy, Shika, she taunted. There's no shadows for you to use, and now I know your limit. Troublesome, Shikamaru said, groaning. Why do I always have to deal with the blondes? Just for that, Ino growled, pulling out a handful of kunai and flinging them in Shikamaru's direction. He dodged them easily with a minimum of movement, some landing in front of him, while others sailed past him a short distance. She smirked to herself and began a series of hand signs. She was going to enjoy this a lot more than she should. Lightning release, chain lightning, she called out, thrusting one hand forward and emitting a burst of electricity. She didn't know this one well enough yet to drop the name or any of the hand signs, so it was a little slow still. She only put a relatively small amount of chakra in the technique, enough to hurt and possibly stun him, but far short of being lethal. Shikamaru dodged much more quickly this time, but his prior laziness cost him. Though the technique missed initially, it struck the kunai Ino had thrown earlier and arced back and forth, jumping from kunai to kunai and striking Shikamaru, who was caught in the middle. She felt a little guilty when she heard his yell of pain, but relaxed when she noticed that the lightning wasn't even burning his skin. She had judged the amount of chakra well, although she probably could have put more in without doing any serious damage. Is she trying to kill him? Mikoto hissed at Kakashi, her hands clenched. Nope, Kakashi replied from his spot leaning against the railing. She's barely putting any chakra in that. If anything, she's holding back too much. Why does the thought of Ino throwing lightning bolts at people scare me? Sakura asked quietly as she watched the match. Sasuke shuddered slightly. It scares me too, he admitted. She's already got a temper. She doesn't need anything to make it even worse. Ino cut off the chakra flowing into the jutsu and allowed it to dissipate. She waited a few moments, pulling out a few more kunai as she waited to see if Shikamaru would surrender or not. She sighed as she saw him slowly getting to his feet, his limbs twitching spasmodically every now and then. Ow, he said, his tone as lazy as it was before. You want some more? Ino called out, annoyed. She hefted the kunai in her hands, but her eyes widened as she saw Shikamaru fling his own kunai towards her, and she saw the paper wrapped around the hilt of the weapon. She threw her kunai towards him as she leapt to the side, making sure to keep her distance from Shikamaru. She didn't want to get caught by his shadow because she'd gotten careless. Instead of the explosion she'd expected, she heard a loud poof and smoke filled the area around where the kunai had landed. A dud? Unlikely, since Naruto was probably Shikamaru's source for tags. A smoke tag then. That made her feel a little safer, but Shika was probably planning to use that smoke to extend his shadow. Sure enough, she could see a tendril of shadow extending from the smoke and began jumping away. Another kunai whipped past her and erupted into another cloud of smoke. She changed course and doubled her speed to gain some extra distance. She stopped in the middle of the damaged area, well away from the two clouds of smoke that were already slowly dissipating. Shikamaru's shadow lanced out of the second cloud towards her, dipping into one of the damaged tiles before coming out of the other side. She tensed, preparing to move away again, but the shadow came to a stop a solid 10 feet away, quivering. She could see Shikamaru himself standing inside the second dissipating cloud, his face set in a grimace as he strained his shadow to its limit. As the cloud faded, the shadow began to shrink, pulling back until it barely reached the outer edge of the damaged area. Nice try, Shika, but you'll have to do better than that, Ino called out. She'd already used a lightning jutsu, and after his painful lesson earlier, he wasn't likely to stay anywhere near her kunai if she threw more. Which earth jutsu should she? Shikamaru was still maintaining the shadow. Shit. She tried to leap away, but her body refused to obey her commands. Shadow possession, success, Shikamaru called out lazily. Kakashi whistled lowly. I hate that Ino got caught, but damn if that isn't impressive. Did they plan that? Mikoto smirked. Your team isn't the only one with good teamwork, you know, she replied smugly. That is such bullshit, Ino replied, frowning. How could you possibly have gotten me from that far away? Shikamaru turned his head to the right, Ino's own mirroring his motion. As her vision panned, she could see the shadow connected to her own coming out of one of the damaged tiles behind her. From that tile she could see the thin shadows stretching from one damaged tile to the next, leading up to the first tile where she had thought his shadow stopped. Ino felt her hand dipping into her pouch and pulling out a kunai. Despite all her efforts, she couldn't stop the kunai from raising until it hovered near her throat. After a long pause, Hate entered the arena. Winner, Shikamaru Nara of Team 73. Ino felt her arm lower before Shikamaru's shadow detached, and she regained control of her body. She grumbled under her breath as she put away the kunai and began gathering up the ones she had thrown earlier. Good work, lazy ass, she said as he strolled by. Thanks, he said, nodding at her. Did you have to hit me with that lightning jutsu? That hurt, he added. Totally your fault for moving as little as possible. Consider it a free lesson, Ino replied, smirking, before she moved to join her teammates on the balcony. Naruto met her halfway. Too bad, Ino-ne-chan. If the proctor was being fair, you would have won with that first jutsu. She shrugged, maybe, but I could have put more chakra into it without doing any real damage, so the fact that he was still functional was my own fault. I could have used the time he was down more effectively too, she admitted, frowning. Well, you didn't want to hurt him too much, so I wouldn't say that you did anything wrong, necessarily. Anyway, don't worry about it. I'll take care of Kiba and we'll be on our way to the third phase. Ino nodded, grinning. Try not to embarrass him too much. His whining can get annoying. I can hear you just fine, you know, Kiba called out from his place next to Hate. Akamaru barked in agreement from his spot next to Kiba. Both Naruto and Ino turned to look at him and grinned widely, nodding in unison. We know, they replied. Kiba growled in annoyance and began tapping his foot impatiently. Naruto moved over to join him, nodding to the proctor. The third battle of the preliminaries is between Naruto Yamanaka of Konoha and Kiba Inuzuka of Konoha. Begin! Kiba immediately pulled out a red pill and tossed it to Akamaru, who bit down on it. After a few moments, Akamaru's fur turned to a deep red. He growled, the sound much deeper and more menacing than usual. Kushu just smirked. Taking this seriously, I see. I'm going to win this! Kiba shouted, his face set in a scowl. Me and Akamaru have been training hard so we could take you down. I'm touched, really, Kushu said, holding a hand over his heart. Internally he was considering how best to approach this fight. There was no question he would win, but should he go for a physical confrontation? Ninjutsu? Use his medical knowledge to disable Kiba? Pull out some of his binding seals for a quick win? Kushu's time trapped in this body had taught him the value of keeping his abilities hidden. Kakashi and the other ninja thought his ninjutsu range was limited to roughly 12 feet at the moment, for instance, when in reality it was closer to 20. A stray thought one day had led to him experimenting with pulling some of his yuki back into the seal, carefully and slowly, of course, as he didn't want to lose any of his progress he had built up over the years. Once he was satisfied that he could send the yuki back outside of the seal easily, he began testing his range again and found that how far he could extend his yuki was directly related to how much yuki he had outside the seal. From there it was a simple matter to begin underplaying his abilities. Mikoto frowned slightly as she listened to her genin declare that his entire purpose for training was to defeat Naruto. I thought I'd gotten him past that, she grumbled. Sakura shook her head. No offense, Mikoto-san, but I don't think Kiba's ever going to admit he doesn't stand a chance against Naruto. Naruto is also really good at getting him riled up without even really trying. Shino adjusted his sunglasses as he observed the two genin in the arena. Kiba's obsession with defeating Naruto is most unreasonable. Naruto has always been the strongest of us, and will likely grow only more so in the future. Learning to work with him and training with him is a much more sensible approach. Kiba and sense don't always go together, Sasuke said, shaking his head slightly. Kiba charged forward, Akamaru right beside him, and began attacking with a series of quick swipes, his fingers curled into claws and reinforced with chakra. He really was taking this seriously, it seemed. If any of his attacks struck, they could do serious damage. Akamaru tried to circle behind him, the dog's teeth snapping at his feet and legs. Kushu began dodging, his body swaying back and forth and his feet shifting rapidly in a maneuver he had seen Kakashi use against his own team to great effect. The seemingly effortless movement had the dual benefit of keeping his hands free and taunting his opponent. While he dodged, he continued to consider his approach. Hinata had used strictly taijutsu and her clan's juken style, while Ino had used a combination of kunai and ninjutsu. He could use genjutsu, but he wasn't known for that and he wanted to keep that particular skill under wraps. With his yuki mixed in, his genjutsu were incredibly effective, and his recent experiments with controlling chakra in other people's bodies would only make them more so. Kushu rolled forward, allowing Kiba and Akamaru's passing Fang attack to pass over his head. Given how much skill he had shown in taijutsu already, he might as well stick with that. Besides, he was really getting tired of Kiba always trying the same thing against him, and a lesson was in order. Thus decided on his course, he waited for Kiba and Akamaru to turn and rush him again, still maintaining their passing Fang attack. Kushu's plans were rudely disrupted when the two cyclones suddenly changed course and moved to either side. His eyes tracked the one on his left, and he almost missed the veritable hail of broken tile shards that flew out of the other one. He still managed to react in time, his hands moving quickly as they slapped the tiles out of the air and his body twisting to avoid others. Despite the large amount of projectiles, none of them managed to even scratch him, much less land a solid hit. He was impressed by Kiba's resourcefulness, though. He honestly hadn't noticed that Kiba had been picking up the tiles as he moved about the arena. Not bad, Kakashi observed as he leaned on the railing next to Mikoto. He knew he wasn't going to land his attacks normally, so he used his normal attack routine as a ruse while he prepared another attack. Mikoto nodded, frowning slightly. It didn't work though. Kakashi just smiled beneath his mask, pride evident in his voice. Not bad, he repeated, but not good enough to take down Naruto. Kushu could actually hear Kiba cursing as none of the shards he had thrown managed to so much as scratch his hands. Kiba redoubled his speed and ferocity, his attack actually leaving gouges on the tile floor as he maneuvered to make another pass at his opponent. Kushu just sighed. Kiba had managed to surprise him with that last move, but that seemed to be the end of his ingenuity. Time to end this. Kushu waited until both Kiba and Akamaru were in the air before leaping towards Kiba. He easily caught Kiba's hands with his own and jerked his arms wide, turning Kiba's own arms against the rotation of the rest of Kiba's body. A sickening pop and a scream of pain showed that he had managed to dislocate one of Kiba's shoulders. Maintaining his hold on Kiba's arms, he yanked him forward and kneed him in the stomach, landing a solid blow on his solar plexus. Akamaru was closing in from behind at this point, fangs bared and claws ready to tear into him. Releasing his hold on Kiba, Kushu twisted his body so that his upper half was parallel to the ground and whipped his leg around, catching Akamaru in the ribs and tossing him several feet to the side where he landed with a loud yelp. Kiba was incapacitated by the earlier blow, his breath wheezing and his eyes rolling wildly, so Kushu pulled out a kunai and held it to his neck. Akamaru climbed back on his feet and was ready to charge forward again, but paused when he saw his partner threatened. Winner, Naruto Yamanaka of Team 71. Announced Hate. Wow, Sakura said, staring at Kiba's crumpled form. That was harsh. Indeed, Shino said, his Kakaicha buzzing slightly. Naruto-san is not usually so efficient when battling Kiba. That is also the first time I have seen Kiba's passing Fang maneuver countered in such a manner. It's worse than that, Sasuke said, his Sharingan activated and his fists clenched. He timed his counter perfectly. He doesn't have so much as a scratch on him from doing that, and he didn't take any damage from those tiles Kiba threw. Either he's gotten much stronger since we graduated, or he's never fought Kiba all out, he growled. Crap, Sakura said, thinking about her own team's chances if they had to face him in the finals. Kushu knelt next to Kiba's prone form. He placed one hand on Kiba's shoulder and activated a medical jutsu while the other grabbed the elbow on that side. With a quick shove he forced the shoulder back into its socket. Kiba barely managed a low moan, still too out of it to register what was going on. Standing up, he dusted his hands off and began heading towards the balcony, letting Chuji and Shikamaru collect their teammate. They waved off the approaching medics and pulled Kiba to his feet, letting him hang off of their shoulders as they followed Naruto to the stairs. Team 71 will advance to the finals, Hate announced. Team 70 and Team 72 will now battle to determine which team will advance. The same rules apply, so you have 5 minutes to consult with your Jounin instructors before informing me of the order in which you will fight. Once he had heard from each team, Hate stepped back into the middle of the arena. Very well, will Lee Rock of Team 72 and Shino Aburame of Team 70 please enter the arena? Yosh! Lee cried as he sprinted into the middle of the arena. He came to a stop in front of Hate, but continued to bounce on his feet. Come, Shino-kun, let us test our flames of youth in this preliminary battle. Shino approached at a much more sedate and dignified pace, nodding to Lee and the proctor when he finally arrived. I see, sending Shino in to face Lee. Not a bad idea, Kakashi observed. Kurenai nodded, smiling. It was pretty much a given that Lee would go first, and my team decided that Shino had the best chance to take him on. Guy shook his head as he moved to stand next to his fellow jounin. Shino-kun is most youthful indeed, but you are sadly mistaken if you think his Kikaichu will be able to overcome Lee's flames of youth. Kurenai's smile faltered. I thought Lee's chakra coils weren't formed properly. Wouldn't that mean he has low chakra reserves and thus leave him vulnerable to chakra-draining attacks like the Aburame clan techniques? She asked quietly, wrapping a genjutsu around the three of them to keep their conversation private. The fourth battle of the preliminary round is between Lee Rock of Konoha and Shino Aburame of Konoha. Begin! Shino immediately replaced himself with a Kikaichu Bunshin and formed a genjutsu around himself to hide his presence, the hand signs for the techniques concealed by the voluminous sleeves of his trenchcoat. Despite the speed of his efforts, he was nearly too slow anyway, as Lee charged forward before dropping into a crouch and sending a sweeping kick at Shino while crying out Konoha Gale. Excitedly, the Bunshin immediately dissolved and the bugs began to latch on to Lee and drain his chakra. Shino relaxed slightly, relieved that his plan was already working. All he needed to do now was buy some time for his bugs to drain Lee's limited chakra reserves and he would win the bout. His confidence faltered when Lee snapped off 2 quick kicks, his legs blurring. The sudden forceful motion caused many of the Kikaichu to lose their grasp on Lee and they went flying through the air, scattering. Roughly a quarter of the Kikaichu remained attached to Lee, but he seemed unconcerned as he settled into a ready stance and began scanning the arena. Shino formed another Kikaichu Bunshin and had it charge Lee. Lee once again rushed forward and effortlessly dispatched the Bunshin. 2 more quick kicks and he once again dislodged many of the Kikaichu on his legs, though the overall number still grew. Shino shifted his position in the arena, moving carefully to avoid detection. The plan was not going quite as smoothly as he had hoped, but it was still effective. Lee seemed unable to detect his presence behind the genjutsu, and was making no efforts beyond the initial kicks to remove the Kikaichu from his person. These tactics, while slow, seemed likely to win the match nonetheless. That is a common misconception, Guy said solemnly. It is not Lee's coils that are malformed, it is his chakra network. Kurenai's face paled. Isn't that fatal? Normally, yes, Guy said, his face grave. However, Lee's case is relatively mild, as it only resulted in roughly 2/3 of his tenketsu not forming correctly, and failing to hold chakra properly. Instead, his chakra is constantly leaking from most of his tenketsu, and diffusing throughout his body. He will never be able to use ninjutsu or genjutsu, and is most fortunate that he has enough properly formed tenketsu in his feet to perform the tree walking and water walking exercises. None of that matters though, because in taijutsu, one day he will surpass me, Guy finished proudly, his face beaming. Kakashi's eye widened. I didn't know that, he admitted. If his chakra is always leaking throughout his body then, indeed, my eternal rival, it is very much like constantly exercising his reserves. Guy replied. Due to that, he actually has very high chakra reserves, more than any Konoha genin in this exam other than the most youthful Naruto-kun. Shino-kun will never be able to drain enough chakra to diminish Lee's flames of youth. Shit, Kurenai muttered. Another Bunshin was created and dispelled, and 2 more kicks sent the Kikaichu flying through the air. A portion of them landed on Shino's hidden form, seeming to disappear in midair as they passed through the genjutsu. Lee's eyes suddenly blazed and he launched himself forward, crying, "There you are!" Shino's eyes widened as he tried to block Lee's rapid attacks, but a heavy kick sent him flying to the side and disrupted his illusion. His form revealed, he unleashed all his Kikaichu in a defensive wave in the hopes that it would slow or deter Lee's attack. His efforts were in vain as Lee charged straight through the cloud, seemingly uncaring as many of them latched onto his form and began draining his chakra. Lee's movements did not seem hindered in the least, and Shino was unable to keep up as a series of heavy punches and kicks rained down on him. His own taijutsu abilities were not poor by any means, but against Lee he might as well have not been trying. Fortunately, he could tell that Lee was pulling his punches considerably or his bones would be snapping and breaking under the assault. He tried to endure to give his Kikaichu time to work, but his vision was already swimming and he felt unconsciousness approaching. He called off his Kikaichu and raised his arms in the air, signaling his surrender. Lee, seeing the shift in his stance and feeling the Kikaichu leave his body, halted his attack and stepped back slightly. He remained wary and ready to resume his assault at a moment's notice, however. I forfeit, Shino called out, his voice calm despite the damage he had received. Hate entered the arena and nodded. Winner, Lee Rock of Team 72, cheering and clapping echoed through the arena as Lee celebrated his victory and ran back up to the balcony to join his teammates. Will Tenten Higurashi of Team 72 and Sakura Haruno of Team 70 please enter the arena? The two girls made their way down to the arena, Tenten looking confident and Sakura looking slightly unnerved. It had been her idea to send Shino against Lee, though her teammates and sensei had agreed with her reasoning. The complete failure of her plan had undermined her confidence about her own chances. It didn't help that she knew she couldn't take Tenten in weapons, either thrown or wielded, or pure taijutsu. She had no idea about the girl's ninjutsu capabilities, though her own weren't exactly impressive. Genjutsu she almost certainly had an advantage in, but she stopped across from Tenten and waited for the proctor's announcement. She mentally shook herself and refocused. She hadn't trained so hard and long just to wilt at the first sign of trouble. Her nerves steadied, a little, anyway. She began reviewing the layered genjutsu she would use against Tenten. The fifth battle of the preliminary round is between Tenten Higurashi of Konoha and Sakura Haruno of Konoha. Begin! Sakura immediately began running through hand signs but was forced to abandon the genjutsu and dodge as Tenten flung a hail of kunai in her direction. Despite her evasion, a few kunai still managed to scratch her. She turned to face Tenten only to find more kunai flying through the air towards her. This pattern continued until Tenten had her backed into a wall. Rather than throwing more kunai that were almost guaranteed to hit, and where the hell was she pulling all of those from, anyway? She had to have thrown at least 50 of them by now. Tenten opened a scroll and quickly unsealed a staff, twirling it expertly as she closed with Sakura. Sakura didn't waste her chance, racing through the string of hand signs required for her planned jutsu faster than she ever had in training. She completed the jutsu and launched it when Tenten was roughly a dozen feet away. The genjutsu was designed in two parts. The outer and easily broken layer would show Sakura morphing into a monster based on Tenten's fears, while the second layer would show Sakura launching a rapid series of low-powered earth jutsu that would herd Tenten towards a specific point in the arena. Sakura herself would move to that point and prepare to ambush Tenten while she was still trapped in the genjutsu. Kakashi smiled at Kurenai as Sakura executed the genjutsu. She's rather fast with those, isn't she? Kurenai smiled proudly. Of all my students, Sakura has had the most success integrating genjutsu into her battle style. Guy nodded thoughtfully. A most youthful display, but it won't be enough. Kurenai frowned and turned to Guy. I know you are a taijutsu specialist, but don't underestimate the power of genjutsu. That's not what I meant, Guy responded calmly. I appreciate the power of a well-applied genjutsu and would certainly not disrespect their potential. What I meant was that Sakura's plan will not be sufficient to defeat Tenten. Once she felt the genjutsu take hold, she rapidly moved away from Tenten. As expected, Tenten first tried to ignore the jutsu and lashed out with her staff, striking the area where Sakura was standing just moments ago. When that failed, Tenten focused and flared her chakra, attempting to force all foreign chakra out of her system and thus disrupt the genjutsu. Sakura was tempted to try to take advantage of Tenten's distraction then and there, but swiftly reconsidered as Tenten whipped the staff around her body repeatedly in an attempt to ward off any strikes she couldn't see. Instead, Sakura watched as Tenten began dodging a series of phantom attacks. Satisfied that the second layer of the genjutsu was working as intended, she began moving into position. Unfortunately, her control over the genjutsu wasn't good enough to launch another jutsu without disrupting it. Kurenai-sensei assured her that as she gained more experience in using genjutsu, that weakness would disappear. It wasn't a matter of chakra control so much as conditioning. She had demonstrated some of what was possible by locking her students in 3 different independent genjutsu, while launching a series of ninjutsu shortly thereafter. None of the students had detected so much as a ripple in the genjutsu they were under, nor had they been able to detect the ninjutsu Kurenai was using until after they were released. She couldn't use another jutsu, but she had her kunai ready once she managed to get close enough to Tenten. All she needed was to hold the blade at her opponent's throat for a second and the battle would be hers. Sakura frowned when, instead of continuing to dodge as she expected, Tenten leapt high into the air and pulled out a pair of large scrolls. Her eyes widened in panic as she realized what Tenten was about to do, and she frantically began another series of hand signs, dropping her hold on the genjutsu. She barely managed to complete the jutsu in time and slammed her hand onto the tiles beneath her feet as Tenten unleashed wave after wave of weapons from within the ceiling scrolls. Earth release, shielding wall, she cried desperately. The tiles shuddered, and for a brief, horrifying moment she thought that she hadn't put enough chakra into the technique. To her immense relief, the tile finally cracked, and the floor rose up to form a barrier several inches thick in front of her. The clang of metal striking tile and stone echoed throughout the arena as her barrier protected her from Tenten's attack. The clanging continued for several seconds before it finally trailed off. Sakura tensed and readied her kunai as she prepared to leave the protection of the barrier. Before she had taken more than a single step, however, a blur whipped around the barrier and smashed into her arm, forcing her to drop the kunai and spinning her body slightly. Before she even had a chance to react, she felt several more blows land, the blur moving so fast she couldn't even determine what sort of weapon it was. Her world spun crazily, and she found herself lying on the ground with her ears ringing and her vision blurry. Winner, Tenten Higurashi of Team 72. She heard the proctor call out, and her heart sank. It took several more seconds before her vision cleared enough to make out Tenten standing above her, a segmented staff poised above her throat. Shame and guilt warred within her as she realized that her failure to win the battle had just cost her team the chance to advance to the finals and possibly earn a promotion to Chunin. She felt tears burning her eyes, but she forced them back as Tenten helped her to her feet. The bun-haired girl had a faintly apologetic look on her face, but she just nodded politely before moving away to join her team. How? Sakura asked suddenly. How did you know it was a genjutsu? Tenten paused and looked back at Sakura. I didn't, she replied easily, but either way you would be forced to defend against my attack, and if it was a genjutsu then you'd almost certainly lose control of it. Sakura swallowed thickly and nodded. Tenten eyed her for a moment before resuming her trek to join her teammates. Sakura followed behind her, moving slowly. Team 72 will advance to the finals, Hate announced. Sakura winced as his voice rang out, followed by more clapping and cheering from the spectators. Each step up to the balcony seemed more difficult than the last, and she felt like her entire body was covered in lead weights as she reached the top. She turned to walk towards her team and saw Team Guy celebrating, Guy and Lee embracing and shouting while Niji was congratulating Tenten in a much more reserved and dignified fashion, a small smile on his face. Team Kakashi and Team Mikoto were also clapping, their attention focused on Team Guy for the moment, and Team Kurenai, her team. Shino looked neutral as always, even as he nodded respectfully to her. Kurenai-sensei had a sympathetic expression on her face, and Sasuke looked angry and frustrated. She flinched when he looked at her, afraid that he was going to yell at her. All her talk about trusting his teammates, and here she lost before he even had the chance to compete at all. She felt all the old insecurities coming back, the feelings of loneliness and anxiety she had never quite forgotten from that first year in the academy. For a moment she contemplated just running from the tower altogether, but she forced that aside. Even if her team turned her away, she could at least face it with her head held high. She had done the best she could, even if it hadn't been enough. Damn Sakura, was that a layered genjutsu? Ino's voice called out, cutting through the haze that had begun to fill Sakura's mind. Indeed it was, Naruto added, and she did it without calling out the name and took less than 2 seconds for 13 hand signs. She's gotten a lot faster since we graduated, he finished, nodding to Sakura respectfully. Sakura gaped for a moment, her mind still locked in self-loathing and having difficulty understanding just what they were saying. Were they complimenting her? Kurenai-sensei stepped forward and laid a comforting hand on Sakura's shoulder. You did very well, Sakura, she said. It was just your misfortune to run up against a more experienced kunoichi. There is nothing to be ashamed of, she added quietly, her last words meant for Sakura's ears alone. Sakura nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak at the moment. Kurenai led her over to her team as the other genin called out their own compliments and encouragement. Shino just nodded again, his message clear. Sasuke stared at her for a long moment before giving her a nod of his own. Good work, he said, and Sakura was startled to find that he actually sounded sincere. Tenten's had a year longer as a genin, and you almost had her anyway, he added. We'll just have to get stronger for next time, he'd said. She took in Shino's calm demeanor and Kurenai-sensei's encouraging smile. Her team wasn't angry with her. Yeah, she said, and smiled even as a few tears escaped. We will. That concludes the preliminaries for the third phase of the exams, Hate announced. Teams 30, 59, 71, and 72 will advance to the finals. Based on the numbers drawn earlier, in the first round of the third phase Team 30 will face Team 59, and then Team 71 will face Team 72 in the second round. The winners of those respective battles will face each other in the finals. I will now explain the format of the third phase. The third phase is a team-based single-elimination tournament. All of you will fight as a team, but if one of your teammates dies or is otherwise eliminated, you may still advance as long as your team as a whole wins the round. The tournament will be held in the Konoha Stadium, and unlike the first two phases, you will have an audience of civilians, nobles, and other ninja. Since we have 4 teams this year, the tournament will be spread out over 2 days. The first 2 battles will be held on the first day, with the finals held on the second day. The winning teams from the first day will be sequestered until the finals on the second day to prevent any outside interference. They will not be allowed to receive any outside help in the form of advice or medical assistance, including from their jounin instructor. Should any participants sustain serious injuries, they may withdraw from the tournament in order to receive aid. They personally will not be able to continue, but their team will not otherwise be penalized. The arena itself will be divided into 3 sections. Each section will have a different simulated terrain type and a number of traps or hazards which you must avoid while battling your opponent. The terrain types and traps will be altered between the first and second days. Each section will also have an objective which you must find and take possession of. In order for a team to win, they must either defeat all of their opponents or maintain possession of all 3 objectives for 5 continuous minutes. You will obviously know who the members of the opposing team are, but you must choose which member of your team will enter which section prior to the beginning of the battle, much like we determined battle orders earlier. During the course of the battle, if one of you manages to defeat your opponent and gain control of the objective, you will have the option of moving into a different section to reinforce one of your teammates. Should only one genin remain on either team, all the barriers preventing travel between the sections will be lowered. As with the second phase, killing is allowed but only during the battle. If you kill an opponent outside of the official battle or an opponent who has been declared defeated, you will be charged with murder. Hate eyed the genin scattered around the balcony for a moment. Are there any questions? Temari coughed loudly as she raised her hand. Yes, when does the 3rd phase start? Hate flushed slightly in embarrassment as he answered, August 1st. The first battle will occur at 10 in the morning and the second battle will occur at 2 in the afternoon. And for the foreign teams, in keeping with the customs of the international Chunin exams, a training ground will be reserved for your exclusive use from now until the 3rd phase begins. You may contact your coordinator for details starting tomorrow. Any other questions? No one else spoke up. You may leave the forest on your own, with your jounin sensei, or wait for a Konoha escort. Our foreign visitors are reminded that the movement restrictions for the duration of their stay in Konoha still apply. You are to be escorted by an approved jounin at all times whenever you leave your lodgings or your training ground. We thank you for your continued cooperation. And with that, you are dismissed. Chapter 27. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. July 18th, 347 NE. 6:00 p.m. Inside the tower, arena. The assembled teams and observers began to slowly exit the arena, some heading back to their rooms and other leaving the tower immediately. But Kushu moved to intercept the Suna team with the rest of his team and his sensei trailing behind. Hey Gaara! Kushu called out, smiling. The Suna team paused and turned to look at him. Temari's and Kankuro's eyes widened and their jounin sensei eyed him suspiciously, but Gaara himself just nodded in response, smiling slightly. It is good to see you again, he started, then trailed off. Kushu blinked in confusion before he realized he never actually told Gaara his name. He laughed and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly as he smiled widely. Hey, I never told you my name, did I? I'm Naruto Yamanaka. This is my sister Ino Yamanaka and my good friend and teammate Hinata Hyuga. Our lazy jounin sensei over there is Kakashi Hataki. Gaara nodded, looking at each person as they were introduced. When Kushu stopped speaking, he turned to look at his own team for a moment before he turned back to Team Kakashi and replied. I'm Gaara Sayama. This is my sister Temari, my brother Kankuro, and my jounin sensei Baki Sakamoto. Gaara's team didn't respond to his introduction, instead staring at him as if he'd grown a second head. The silence stretched for several seconds and Kushu could sense his own teammates shifting uncomfortably, wondering what was going on. He decided to step in to help ease the tension. A pleasure to meet you, Temari-san, Kankuro-san, Sakamoto jounin, he said, and he heard his teammates adding their own pleasantries. That finally seemed to pull Temari out of her shock as she turned to look at Kushu. You were that guy at the gate, she said, just managing to keep her voice from rising to a yell. Indeed I was, Kushu replied, smiling. What did you do to Gaara? She demanded, stepping forward menacingly and putting a hand on her fan. Kushu merely raised an eyebrow in response even as his teammates tensed. Temari, Gaara said quietly as he laid a hand on her shoulder. It's all right. He helped me. She startled and then slowly relaxed, flushing slightly as she realized that Gaara had been talking quite civilly to this boy and apparently viewed him as something of a friend. Since when did Gaara even have friends? Or make introductions, for that matter? Sorry, she said as she removed her hand from her fan and stepped back. Not at all, Kushu replied smoothly. I would do far worse to any who threatened my family. His eyes strayed to meet Gaara's as he spoke, and Gaara nodded silently in response. How did you help Gaara? Kankuro asked, his voice a mix of suspicion and genuine curiosity. Due to a certain condition I have in common with Gaara, I was uniquely qualified to assist in the implementation of his new treatment, Kushu answered. His team and sensei were of course already aware of his status as a Jinchuriki Kakashi from the very beginning, Hinata once she activated her Byakugan, and Ino when she began her training in the Yamanaka Jutsu. Judging from the way Baki's eyes widened, he understood the hidden meaning immediately. Temari and Kankuro took a moment longer, as they exchanged a confused glance before turning to look at Gaara. Their faces suddenly paled, and they whipped their heads around to look at the blond-haired boy in front of them again as they realized what he had meant. Kusha smirked. Technically he wasn't supposed to tell anyone outright without the Hokage's permission, but it certainly wasn't his fault if someone figured it out from a vague reference, now was it? Kakashi sighed and pulled Baki to the side to engage him in a quiet conversation. From what Kusha could make out, which was most of it, Kakashi was asking Baki to keep that revelation to himself. Kakashi then quickly moved on to giving the slightly edited version of Naruto's life to this point, emphasizing the accepting nature of those in the know in regards to his status. He apparently wasn't wasting this opportunity to try to impress the Suna team with the benefits of life in Konoha. Temari's eyes kept darting back and forth between Kushu and Gaara, apparently attempting to visually compare the smiling and cheerful blonde before them with her quiet, brooding brother. Kankuro took a much more direct, if carefully worded, approach. You haven't had any complications in the past, have you? It was difficult to find the proper treatment in Suna. Not at all. My family was very supportive and understanding, and many other people in Konoha are sympathetic regarding the nature of my condition. Not to mention that the medication available in Konoha is highly effective. There have been times when I forget I have this condition at all. I think Gaara's new treatment will be similarly successful. Kankuro cleared his throat several times before he managed to reply. That's good to know, he said, his voice slightly thick. Temari's expression was varying between anger and joy, and she finally looked away to compose herself. Ino and Hinata exchanged glances and nodded before they approached Temari and began talking to her softly. Kushu turned his attention back to Gaara, who had been watching the exchange curiously. So, what do you say we get some dinner and talk, get to know each other a little better? He offered. Gaara cocked his head to the side and thought for a moment. What did you have in mind? He asked finally. Kushu's grin widened. There's this place called Ichiraku's. Sarutobi watched as Naruto. He found it impossible to think of him as anything else, despite what he now believed, finally left the tower with his team and the Suna team in tow. His initial depression that the child he thought he had known had never existed had given way to a deep rage at the thought that the beast who had killed so many of his ninja had tricked the entire village. Tricked him. For so long, that anger had in turn given way to confusion. Once he began analyzing the situation, nothing really made sense. The beast was clearly intelligent if it could pretend to be a human being for so long, highly intelligent, actually, since Naruto was widely considered to be one of the smartest ninja Konoha had ever produced. On par with the likes of the Nara, Itachi, Minato, or even himself. If it was intelligent, however, what was its goal? Even the most cynical examination of Naruto's actions couldn't find any truly malicious intent. At worst, he was gathering allies. He had actually done a great deal to strengthen the next generation of ninja as the driving force behind the clan kids. There were also no indications that he was anything other than a loyal ninja of Konoha, hidden or otherwise. Given how closely Naruto had been watched by Anbu for most of his life, and how much time Inoichi had spent with him in counseling, if there was anything to find they would have found it. Sarutobi shivered slightly as he thought about the Yamanaka family. If his suspicions were correct, the Yamanakas, Ino especially, would be devastated. For their sake as well as the sake of Konoha, he hoped things weren't as bad as he feared. He hadn't entirely discarded the idea that the tailed beast's mind had been destroyed in the ceiling somehow. The death god had said he couldn't kill the beast or separate its soul, but perhaps he had destroyed whatever part made it evil? His heart longed for this theory to be true even as his mind and instincts told him that it was a fool's hope. The summoned tribes clearly believed that Naruto was the nine-tailed beast, and their veiled words and vague warnings hinted that the tailed beasts were more than they appeared. Enma's final warning that the beasts were far more dangerous than you can ever imagine sent chills down his spine every time he recalled it. The ninja world believed the beasts to be immortal engines of hatred and destruction. What could possibly be worse than that? He knew so little about the circumstances surrounding Naruto, and found himself at a loss when he tried to make plans in the light of this revelation. The situation had lasted for nearly 13 years without any damage to Konoha, but he had no idea if that would last. He could ignore this new information and continue as if he'd never had that conversation with Enma, but that path went against everything he was and everything he believed in. He was known as the professor for a reason. Information was the greatest weapon in his arsenal. He sighed and began making his way out of the tower. There was only one place he could get more information at this point, and that was from Naruto himself. Before he could do that, however, he would need to prepare for the worst. If Naruto really was the tailed beast, and he'd merely been biding his time since the ceiling, it was entirely possible the confrontation could lead to his own death. He had lived long enough that the thought didn't disturb him as it once did, but his duty to Konoha had kept him going before and drove him onward now. There was much he could and would do to try to take the beast with him if it turned to battle. Plans to make, traps to lay, seals and jutsu to prepare. He would make sure to subtly prepare his ANBU and the other ninja under his command for such an eventuality, perhaps under the guise of an emergency drill in preparation for the third phase. But his thoughts quickly turned to the long-term consequences of his death. It seemed it was time to finally make the decision he had delayed for so long. It was time to choose his successor. July 18th, 347 NE, -7:00 p.m. Ichiraku's ramen stand. Ino shook her head in disbelief as she watched Naruto and Gaara sitting at the bar. This, Gaara, is the greatest food ever conceived by man, Naruto proclaimed grandiosely as Tsuchi placed a bowl before the Suna Genin. Gaara's eyes widened in anticipation as he carefully lifted the first bite to his mouth. He chewed thoughtfully for a moment as everyone in the stand, which included all of Team Kakashi and Team Baki in addition to Tsuchi and his daughter Ayame, unconsciously held their breath, waiting for his verdict. He finally swallowed and turned to Naruto. "It's alright," he said. Silence reigned for a long moment before Ino burst into laughter, setting off the other occupants of the ramen stand. Tsuchi himself looked slightly disappointed. He had probably been hoping for another customer as dedicated as Naruto himself. Naruto's indignant voice rose above the din. "Alright? Alright? How could such perfection possibly be described merely as alright?" Gaara shrugged. "I prefer drier foods," he replied simply. Naruto huffed indignantly before he turned to Tsuchi. "I'll have my usual," he said sullenly. Tsuchi grinned widely as he began preparing a large batch of ramen. Ayame shook her head as she began helping out, giggling softly at the expression on Naruto's face. Ino turned her attention back to Temari, who was watching the scene with a slightly stunned expression on her face. "What's wrong?" she asked quietly. Temari shook herself and looked over at Ino. "It's just, he's so different now," she replied softly. "In a good way, I hope?" "Yes," Temari said loudly, momentarily drawing everyone's attention to her. She ignored their lacks as she continued her conversation with Ino, though she did lower her voice. "I mean, yes. He's so much more open and relaxed than he used to be." Ino eyed Ryuto's container for a moment, taking in his neutral expression and his reserved mannerisms as he continued eating the bowl of ramen and conversing with Naruto. "If you say so," she said dubiously. "He's still pretty quiet," Temari allowed, "but he's actually talking to people without getting upset," she finished lamely. "He wasn't treated very well, was he?" Ino asked softly. "Naruto told me a bit about what Gaara's medication was like." Temari shook her head, a scowl fixed on her face. "No, he wasn't," she bit off angrily. "Every time I think that bastard did this to Gaara on purpose, she trailed off, her face flushing and her fists clenching. "That bastard?" Ino asked curiously. Temari blinked and calmed a little. She looked like she was considering whether to answer the question or not, but after glancing at Naruto and Gaara again she replied, "The Kazekage. I thought that you and your siblings were his children." "Yes, not that he would ever admit it." "I don't think of that bastard as my father anymore either." Ino grimaced and decided to change the topic as she noticed Temari's mood darkening even further. "So, what do you think of Konoha so far?" Temari continued fuming for a moment before she answered the question. "It's been much nicer than we expected." "That's great," Ino said, happy to have found a more pleasant topic. "I know we'll both be busy preparing for the third phase, but we should try to find time so we can show you guys around Konoha properly, give you the full tour." Naruto and Gaara seemed to be hitting it off great too, so it should be a lot of fun. Temari smiled slightly and nodded. I would like that. Same day, 10:00 p.m. Sarutobi compound. The Hokage sat back in his chair and stared at the 2 files lying on his desk. He had eliminated most of the ninja from consideration early on due to lack of experience, skill, or dedication to the village. Not that he doubted the loyalty of his ninja, but the personal sacrifices it took to function as Hokage were a step above what most ninja were willing to endure. He'd always had a short list in the back of his head, but unfortunately there was no ninja in the village as clearly qualified as Minato had been. He picked up the first file, staring at the picture of Kakashi Hatake. He was young, nearly 15 years younger than the other remaining candidate, but still older than Minato had been and much older than Sarutobi himself had been. He was also widely known outside the borders of Konoha, which would be a boon in attracting attention and dealing with nobles. His prowess on the battlefield was among the highest in the village, and he was every bit as effective in missions that called for subtlety. His standing in the village was high, though some still resented his reputation as a genius and a prodigy. Sarutobi could sympathize, as there had been quite a few people who resented his own rapid growth when he was young. It would be a problem, but hardly an insurmountable one. Kakashi's political experience was lacking, though. His time in ANBU had served to boost his skills considerably, but nearly all his leadership experience was limited to highly trained and dedicated ANBU teams. He rarely worked with non-ninja, but that could be remedied. He would have some misgivings about handing over the title to Kakashi immediately, but overall he was confident that Kakashi could grow into the role and serve Konoha well. He moved on to the second file, smirking at the lazy expression on Shikaku Nara's face in the picture. Unlike with Kakashi, he had no doubts about the ability of his Jounin commander to handle the political and administrative portions of the job, and those were, admittedly, the majority of the burdens involved. His incredible work as Jounin commander had helped Konoha greatly as the village recovered from the tailed beast's attack, and he was highly respected for that. He also had a good reputation as part of the Ino Shikacho team. Unfortunately, as an individual he wasn't widely known outside of ninja circles, and in battle he was definitely weaker overall than Kakashi. Still an S-rank shinobi, without question, but no one would rank him among the strongest in the village without the support of his teammates. Being the strongest wasn't a requirement by any means, but nobles, potential clients, and even other villages judged the strength of a village partially on the strength of its leader. That was part of the reason for Konoha's success. Hashirama Senju, Tobirama Senju, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and Minato Namikaze had led the village, and all were known as some of the most powerful ninja to ever live. When you had a nickname like the God of Shinobi as he did, or were rumored to have killed over 100 enemy ninja in less than a minute as Minato was, people took notice. From that perspective Kakashi was the obvious choice, but Shikaku would almost certainly be more effective performing the actual duties the job required, which would benefit the village more in the long term. The Hokage sighed, wishing yet again that Minato was still the Hokage and that he didn't have to keep making decisions like this. The fact that he was being forced to make this decision because Minato's son may, or may not actually be an immortal beast that may, or may not be bent on the destruction of the village just made it that much worse. His musings were interrupted by a rapid knocking on his door. "What is it?" he snapped. Dragon opened the door and walked in, his entire body tense. "Hokage-sama, we have a problem." "Great, just what he needed." He motioned for Dragon to continue even as he stifled his irritation. 26 teams entered the Forest of Death 3 days ago. Of those teams, 6 entered the tower and 4 left the forest after losing their markers. Once the exam ended, we sent in squads to retrieve the other teams. "Right," the Hokage said. "Those squads have just reported back after completing their search. They found 5 teams dead in the forest, but the other 11 teams are missing." "Missing? They couldn't find them?" "Yes, Hokage-sama. We were able to track their movements successfully, but those teams began disappearing towards the end of the first day. We are reasonably certain that they never left the Forest of Death, but a thorough search of the confines of the forest has revealed no trace of their current whereabouts." The Hokage rubbed his temples tiredly. He really didn't need an international incident on top of everything else going on. Still, no reason he couldn't use this situation to help resolve his current dilemma. "Have Shikaku, Kakashi, and the Chunin commanders report to my office in 20 minutes. July 20th, 347 NE, -7:00 AM. Otafu Kagai. Jiraiya waited impatiently at his private table, anticipating both the arrival of his breakfast and of his guest. As it turned out, his guest arrived first. The cloaked figure settled into the seat across from him. There were no identifying marks and no exposed skin, but there was no way he could even mistake the unique feeling of his former teammate's chakra from this range. He nodded silently and motioned for her to wait. After breakfast had arrived, he had thought ahead and ordered for Tsunade as well, and the waitress had departed after receiving a hefty tip to ensure privacy. He pulled out a few tags and set up a privacy barrier. Tsunade sighed in relief as she pulled off the cloak and laid it over the back of her chair. Despite the early hour, it was a sweltering day, and she'd been forced to forego chakra techniques for the sake of discretion. Her blonde hair was plastered to her head, and her clothing was damp with sweat already. "Thank Kami I can get out of that cloak," she exclaimed before gulping down her glass of water. "You can always strip down some more if the heat bothers you," Jiraiya said as he eyed her sweat-covered form appreciatively. "In your dreams, pervert," Tsunade snapped reflexively, smirking. She never admitted, but she occasionally missed the familiar back and forth of her banter with Jiraiya. "You know it, Tsuheim," he replied, a grin on his face. His face settled into a more serious expression. "How's Kushina doing?" Tsunade sighed before taking a few bites of her meal. Jiraiya waited patiently, consuming his own breakfast in turn. "She's still obsessed with killing Sensei," she finally replied, "and she still spends the vast majority of her time training. Physically, she's better than ever, but mentally, she's stable, but she hasn't really improved." Jiraiya sighed. "Sensei really fucked up back then." October 14th, 334 NE-1:00 AM. Konoha's northern gate. A cloaked figure holding a small bundle darted across the street, moving swiftly and silently towards the gate that lead out of Konoha. The figure paused a few hundred feet away from the gates, watching the guards as they chatted quietly and observed their surroundings from within the confines of the gatehouse. "What are you doing, Kushina?" a voice called out from behind. Kushina startled and whipped around to find the Hokage standing before her clad in his ceremonial robes. His hat was missing, however, leaving his slightly balding head and gray hair exposed. He was backed by 2 squads of ANBU. Kushina glanced around warily, noting that she was now completely surrounded. "I'm leaving," she finally replied, her voice harsh. The Hokage's face appeared confused, but she could see the understanding and resignation hidden in his eyes. "Why would you leave in the dead of night? Just tell me where you're going and I can arrange for an ANBU escort to take you wherever you would like, and at a more proper hour." "I'm leaving Konoha, you old fool," Kushina snapped, glaring. The Hokage sighed, giving up his pretense of confusion. "Why would you leave, Kushina? This is Minato's home, your home. Besides, Naruto-kun shouldn't be out on the roads at his age, regardless of how healthy he is." "Naruto is the reason I'm leaving," she said, her voice rising slightly and gaining a manic edge. "I know all about what happened at the council meeting. I know they want to kill my baby, that they think he's the tailed beast reincarnated. I won't let them." Sarutobi shook his head sadly. "That was only a small portion of the council, and their misunderstanding has been corrected. No one knows who Naruto is in any case, so he's perfectly safe here. I would never allow any harm to come to your son." "Don't lie to me," Kushina growled. "I know how ninja villages treat their Jinchuriki. You just want him as a weapon." The Hokage's eyes hardened, but he kept his voice calm. "You aren't thinking clearly, Kushina. I know the last few days have been very difficult for you, as they have been for everyone. Please return home, get some sleep, and we can talk about this in the morning. I am more than willing to work out any arrangements you feel are necessary for Naruto's protection." Kushina shook her head, clutching the bundle tightly to her chest. "He'll never be safe here, no matter what you do. I'll take him somewhere where no one will ever know who we are or what he is." "I can't let you do that, Kushina. You are still recovering from childbirth, and Naruto is less than a week old. Even as strong as you are, so many things could go wrong if you go out there alone." "I don't care," Kushina replied, began to back away towards the gates. The guards had noticed the confrontation taking place and were watching warily, prepared to support the Hokage if needed. "He's my son, I will take care of him. No one will take him from me." The Hokage sighed again and signaled one of his ANBU. The tiger-masked ANBU stepped forward and shifted his mask slightly. Kushina whirled to face him, looking directly into his whirling Sharingan eye before she registered the threat. That brief contact was all that Tiger needed to trap her in a genjutsu. Kushina froze in place, her eyes locked with Tiger's. The Hokage moved forward and gently removed the bundle from her unresisting arms. Stepping back, he said, "Take her to the ANBU HQ medical wing, gently. She is to be treated with the utmost respect, am I clear?" "Yes, Hokage-sama." Same day, -7:00 AM. ANBU HQ medical wing. Kushina slowly began to stir as the sunlight hit her eyes, turning her head slightly and starting to roll over. She stiffened when she felt the restraints holding her to the bed, and her eyes snapped open. She was in a hospital room judging by the equipment, but not one in the main hospital. She must be in ANBU HQ then. Good morning, Uzumaki-san, an ANBU called out. Please don't fight the restraints too much. I apologize for them, but they were a necessary measure considering your state earlier. She didn't care about any of that. Where is my son? She asked. I'm sorry, the ANBU said, but I do not know his current whereabouts. The Hokage was looking after him personally last I knew. Kushina was no longer paying attention, however, her mind calling forth the last words of a dead man that haunted her dreams. Minato barely managed to choke out the words "I'm sorry" before he disappeared from the hospital room. Where is my son? Kushina growled, shaking off the unwelcome memory. Uzumaki-san, please calm down. Allow me to summon a doctor, and we can get all of this sorted out. They had taken her son. Someone had taken her son away from her again, just like Minato had. She had begged and pleaded, and he'd still taken her son, taken him to seal a beast in his gut, and damn him to a lifetime of hatred and pain. That was okay though, she'd just take him back. As she made her decision, Kushina felt her mind sharpen as an amazing sense of focus and clarity settled over her. She flexed her chakra slightly, feeling it respond swiftly and easily. They had neglected to use chakra-suppressing seals on her. That was foolish of them, very foolish. They had clearly underestimated her, or believed her far more weakened by childbirth than she really was. The ANBU stiffened when he felt her chakra flaring. Use 'em. Nearly a dozen chains made of solid chakra exploded from her form, shattering her restraints as they ripped through the bed she was laying on and the medical equipment surrounding her. The unfortunate ANBU never even got to finish speaking as half a dozen chains impacted his form and slammed him through a wall. He barely managed to survive by using his chakra to absorb some of the blow, but his head received a nasty shock and several bones were shattered by the dual impacts, and he quickly lost consciousness. Kushina stumbled to her feet and began walking towards the doorway. She didn't know where her son was yet, but she was perfectly ready to tear apart every building in Konoha if need be. Her face hardened in determination even as ANBU began to swarm around her, responding to the disturbance she had caused within their own headquarters. Where is my son? She asked. One of the ANBU, Tiger, stepped forward holding a bundle in his arms. He's right here, Uzumaki-san. I'm sure he would like to see his mother as well, so if you would just calm down everything will work out fine. Kushina's face relaxed, and the chains began dissolving as she stepped closer to the ANBU to take her son into her arms. As she reached out, however, she hesitated. Something was off, something was wrong. The bundle looked like her son, but it didn't feel like him. The presence of the beast locked inside of him was missing. Her hand suddenly jerked upward, seizing Tiger by the neck and squeezing harshly. Her chains reformed immediately and wrapped around him, preventing the ANBU from responding to her attack. The other ANBU were shouting at her, their words buzzing in her ears as she turned her gaze to them. None of them had Naruto, so they didn't matter. The chains wrapped around Tiger, responding to her will, began to squeeze even as more chains formed, waving through the air at the other ninja surrounding her. She could feel her body protesting the strain of using so much chakra, but she didn't ease up or even hesitate. She would not rest until her son was once again safe within her arms. Her face twisted into a snarl even as the other ninja rushed forward. Same day, 8:00 a.m., Hokage's office. The Hokage sagged back into his seat as Dragon continued explaining what had occurred in ANBU HQ. We were eventually able to restrain her without any loss of life, but we sustained some serious injuries, Tiger especially. Uzumaki is currently locked down in a high-security cell with 2 squads keeping watch on her. We have also added chakra-suppressing seals in addition to a full set of restraints. What is her condition? Minor injuries only. Nothing life-threatening or permanent. Do you have any idea what caused her to react like that? Dragon shifted uncomfortably. She just kept asking about her son. Tiger tried a genjutsu to make her think her son was there in order to keep things calm until she could be subdued, but she reacted very badly when she saw through the illusion. I see. Keep her there for the time being. I will visit later to judge her state for myself, the Hokage said grimly. Shortly after Dragon left, Tsunade barged into his office, looking panicked. Sensei, I can't find Kushina or Naruto anywhere. She was. I know where she is, Sarutobi interrupted. Tsunade sagged in relief. Thank Kami. Where is she? Is she alright? She's in ANBU prison, he said flatly. Tsunade blinked rapidly for a moment before she shook her head. Very funny, Sensei. Now where is she? I was not joking. She attempted to flee Konoha last night, taking Naruto with her. Tsunade's face betrayed her shock before it turned to anger. And you threw her in prison for that? She snarled. No, I didn't. I had her rendered unconscious and left her in the ANBU hospital so that she could get some rest and hopefully think more rationally once she had done so. When she awoke, she immediately began attacking the ANBU, taking care of her, and nearly killed him, along with several others who responded to the disturbance. Tsunade paled as she realized what Kushina had done. What about Naruto? Was he hurt? Naruto was not there, thankfully. Instead of appearing relieved, Tsunade paled even further. You took Naruto away from her? Temporarily, yes. I wanted to make sure she was in her right mind before returning him to her custody. You took Naruto from her, Tsunade repeated flatly. Why? The Hokage asked. Sensei, Kushina has literally not let Naruto out of her sight since she got him back. She only manages to get any rest when she passes out due to sheer exhaustion or when I use a sleep jutsu on her. That sounds a little excessive, but I can understand her concern, I suppose, the Hokage said dubiously. No, I don't think you can. I don't think she's told anyone else, and I certainly haven't told anyone, but when Minato took Naruto from the hospital, he took him. The Hokage paled. What do you? He kidnapped Naruto for the ceiling, she said bluntly. Minato asked Kushina if he could hold his child, and shortly after that he left using the Hiraishin. He never once asked Kushina what she wanted or if she approved. In fact, she begged him not to do it. And now you've taken Naruto away from her again. The Hokage sighed tiredly and rubbed his temples. Damn it, this is such a mess. He sighed again and shook his head. It's unfortunate that it turned out this way, but Kushina clearly isn't in her right mind. Tsunade frowned. What are you talking about? Kushina is so obsessed with protecting Naruto from the supposed threats in this village that she was prepared to leave in the middle of the night, alone. No matter how strong she is, she can't possibly protect him all the time. And it sounds like she'd drive herself into the ground in short order if left on her own. She is also clearly a threat to other people while she is in this condition, as evidenced by her actions this morning, regardless of her reasons. Just give Naruto back to her, and she'll calm down, perhaps, but she'll also likely try to flee again, and there's no telling what she'd do the next time someone tries to stop her. I'll work with her, try to calm her down, Tsunade said firmly. I hope you will, the Hokage replied, nodding. But I can't return Naruto to her custody until I'm certain she won't try this again. Sensei, that's her son. You can't just take him away like that. I am not taking him away permanently. But until I'm certain she is rational, I can't possibly trust her with a child, even her own. She's not rational because you took away her son, and I took him away because she was going to get him killed, along with herself. The Hokage shouted. Tsunade recoiled slightly. She stifled her initial retort, and tried to calm herself. What will you do if she doesn't return to thinking rationally without being allowed to keep her son? She asked through clenched teeth. The Hokage shook his head. I will not risk Minato's son, he said firmly. Tsunade's eyes widened slightly and her fist shook. I see, she hissed through clenched teeth. In that case, I will not waste any more of your time, Hokage-sama, she snapped, then turned and marched out of the room. Same day, 5:00 p.m. Tsunade's residence. Tsunade paced furiously back and forth in her living room, muttering to herself. It wasn't that she couldn't understand Sensei's point of view, but she just couldn't bring herself to agree with it. She'd been working with Kushina ever since that first night, and she'd already made some progress. It was clear she'd made a mistake in telling Kushina about what happened in the council meeting, but she felt that Kushina had a right to know about possible threats to Naruto. Even knowing how it turned out, she couldn't say she would have done anything differently. Despite that setback, however, Kushina was slowly relaxing as she spent more time with Naruto. Yes, she still had an obsessive need to make sure he was safe, but after just 2 days she was already having an easier time dropping off to sleep, and Kushina trusted her to look after Naruto while she rested. That fact alone convinced Tsunade that Kushina was far more rational than Sensei apparently believed. Further, given what had happened in the hospital and then later in the council meeting, Kushina's fears were entirely justified as far as Tsunade was concerned. Tsunade also knew how most Jinchuriki were treated, which only pushed her even further into Kushina's camp. Still, Tsunade had slowly been working to let Kushina know that there were still people she could trust in Konoha. Kushina already trusted her, and Shizen was making solid progress on that front as well. Between the three of them, they could make sure Naruto was well cared for without putting undue stress on any one of them. It would also allow them time to work through Kushina's issues. Tsunade grimaced slightly as she recalled what Kushina had been doing last night. Clearly Kushina felt the danger was a little more immediate than Tsunade herself had thought, But even that wouldn't have been insurmountable if Sensei hadn't interfered. Sensei had just destroyed all of her progress with his thoughtless actions, however, and likely set Kushina back even further. There was no chance that Kushina would ever willingly stay in Konoha now, and his last comment had made it clear to Tsunade that he would never let Kushina leave Konoha with Naruto. Whether it was conscious or not, he viewed Naruto as Minato's son more than Kushina's. Tsunade was also realistic enough, and understood just how seriously Sensei took his duty as Hokage, to acknowledge that Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki was probably a factor in that decision as well. Sensei was looking out for Konoha's well-being as best he could, and he was willing to leave Kushina to suffer if he felt he had to. He likely consoled himself by thinking of it as protecting Naruto rather than hurting Kushina. Tsunade growled under her breath. Sensei may be able to do that, but she couldn't. She already lost so many people, Dan and Iwaki foremost among them, to this village. She refused to lose any more. Let Sensei do what he thought best for the village as a whole. She was going to do what she thought best for Kushina. Same day, 7:00 p.m., Tsunade's residence. Shizen sat on the couch in stunned disbelief as Tsunade finished explaining the situation. Keeping her away from Naruto and sticking her in prison where she will be unable to see or protect him is going to kill her, literally. There's no possible way she'll ever recover under those conditions. That's why we're going to break her out. Unfortunately, we'll have to flee Konoha without Naruto for now. Unlike Kushina, I do believe Sensei will protect Naruto, so we'll have time to prepare to hide from Konoha and anyone else who will be looking for us. Once we've done that, the three of us will be able to keep him safe and look after each other without any problems. We can figure out how to get Naruto out of Konoha from there. Shizen clenched her fists as she listened to Tsunade explain her plan. Tsunade was going to visit Kushina under the pretense of checking up on her, then bust her out, fighting her way through all of ANBU and the Hokage himself if necessary. The hardest part of this is going to be convincing Kushina to leave without Naruto. I can only hope she still trusts me as much as I think she does. Anyway, let's get ready, Tsunade said, heading towards her room to begin storing away all of her things. Shizen hesitated for a brief moment before she stood from the couch and faced her teacher, her fists tightening nervously. Despite her inner turmoil, she still managed to keep her voice firm. No. Chapter 28. Tell me why. October 14th, 334 NE, 7:15 p.m., Tsunade's residence. Tsunade turned to face her apprentice, a confused expression on her face. No? What do you mean, no? Shizen shook her head slowly. Tsunade's plan was typical of her. Her teacher always favored the direct approach whenever possible, and she normally had the strength and experience to handle anything that got in her way. This time, however, there was no way it could possibly work. They would be going up against a building full of ANBU and, far worse than that, the Hokage himself. That plan will never work, Tsunade-sama. Even you would not be able to fight your way out of ANBU HQ while carrying Kushina, and the Hokage is almost guaranteed to show up. Do you honestly believe you could take him on, even if he was alone? Tsunade growled, but had to admit that her apprentice had a point. We need a way to smuggle Kushina out without drawing attention, preferably without anyone even noticing she's gone until you are well away. And I have an idea, Shizen said, smiling wanly. October 15th, 334 NE, 10:00 a.m., ANBU prison. The ANBU guarding Kushina's cell nodded respectfully to Tsunade and Shizen as they approached. The chief medic of Konoha and her apprentice were a common sight in the prison cells of ANBU headquarters, as they had both the clearance and the skill necessary to deal with any medical issues that could, and often did, arise. I'll be erecting some privacy seals as we conduct a full physical examination, Tsunade said. The ANBU nodded, making a note in the ledger. You will be subjected to a search when you leave, the ANBU said apologetically. As you know, it's standard procedure. Tsunade just nodded impatiently and bustled into the room. Once the door was closed and the privacy barrier in place, Shizen immediately began removing Kushina's restraints while Tsunade began counteracting the combination of drugs and jutsu that kept Kushina sedated. Kushina awoke with a start, her eyes flaring wildly. Her arms and legs immediately began to pull against the loosening restraints, and Shizen stepped back to give her some room. The red-haired woman calmed considerably when she saw who was in the room with her. Naruto? She asked, her words slurred due to the drugs still present in her system. He's fine, Kushina, perfectly fine. We need to get you out of here before we do anything else, Tsunade said. Kushina blinked for a few moments, then nodded. A few more minutes and she was freed from her restraints and much more clear-headed. She kept looking at the closed door and privacy seals curiously as her mind shook off its drug-induced haze. What's going on, Tsunade-sama? She asked. Tsunade sighed quietly before replying. This conversation was going to be very interesting. Your release isn't exactly official, Kushina. Short version is that we're smuggling you out. The Hokage has no intention of giving Naruto back to you anytime soon, and staying here will kill you. We're leaving Konoha like you planned, but we can't take Naruto with us just yet. Kushina's eyes flared wildly and her face twisted into a snarl. I won't leave my son behind. Tsunade turned and grabbed Kushina's shoulders, her eyes boring into the red-haired woman's own. Listen to me, Kushina, she said forcefully. She was internally relieved when Kushina made no more than a token effort to break free of her grip. The younger woman had a great deal of respect for her, which she was going to be relying on heavily. If we take Naruto with us, they will never stop hunting us and he will never be safe. A life on the run would kill him as surely as any assassin. If you stay, you will be stuck in this cell for the foreseeable future, quite possibly the rest of your very short life. Kushina stood transfixed, her eyes boring into Tsunade's own as she listened to the older woman. I want to protect Naruto as much as you do, but it's going to take some sacrifices on our part to do that. We can't guarantee Naruto's safety while we are fleeing from Konoha's Hunter-nin. There's also the possibility that we will be placed in the bingo book and all of the elemental nations will be after us. We can't expose Naruto to that without thorough preparations. Tears were spilling down Kushina's face. Our best option is to leave Naruto here until we have prepared a safe place to hide away. But, it's the only way, Kushina. However, Naruto won't be alone here. Shizen will be staying behind to look after him as best she can while we prepare a true home for him. You trust Shizen, don't you? Kushina nodded slowly as she struggled to get her emotions under control. Shizen spoke up softly, her voice firm and filled with determination. I will take care of him, Kushina, I swear it on my life. Kushina trembled under Tsunade's grip, her mind grappling with the situation even as her instincts screamed at her to charge out of the room and find Naruto that very moment. How long? She asked finally. Tsunade grimaced. As long as it takes. One way or another, Naruto will be safe, she said, pushing every scrap of conviction she possessed into the words. She mentally added, and so will you. Kushina's eyes flicked back and forth between Tsuwanda and Shizen for several minutes as she warred with herself internally. Finally, the tension bled out of her body and she nodded. For Naruto. Tsunade finally released Kushina from her grip and turned to Shizen. Her apprentice nodded grimly and lay back on the bed, shifting until she was lying in the same position Kushina had been a few minutes before. I'm ready, Tsunade-sama, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Kushina glanced back and forth between them, confused. Tsunade swallowed thickly even as she began a long string of hand signs. Be safe, Shizen. Same day. 10:30 a.m. ANBU prison. The ANBU ran through the standard array of checks on Tsunade and Shizen, while his partner checked the cell and confirmed that the prisoner was present and secured. The restraints were all back in place, and the chakra-suppressing seals applied and functioning. He closed the door and reactivated the locking seals before signaling his partner. The whole process took less than 2 minutes as they performed their tasks with efficiency honed by years of experience. The ANBU bowed respectfully as the chief medic and her apprentice left. October 21st, 334 NE. 10:00 a.m. Hokage's office. The Hokage tried to keep his roiling emotions under control as he stared expectantly at the deer-masked ANBU. Tsunade-sama and Shizen-sen reportedly left on the 15th heading for Otafukagai to conduct a tour of the medical facilities there and determine the feasibility of establishing a long-term A-rank mission to staff the hospital with one or more med-needs. As you know, Hokage-sama, they never arrived, Deer reported, fidgeting slightly. The tracking squads we dispatched report that neither Tsunade-sama nor Shizen-san entered or have been anywhere near the town within the last week. The squads have been unable to find any trail for either of them between Konoha and Otafukagai. The squads then began a circuit around Konoha, but none of them have been able to find a trail for either Tsunade-sama or Shizen-san in any direction. The Inuzuka have also reported that the scent at the area they were last reported is weaker than it should be. Deer swallowed nervously, knowing that the Hokage was not going to like this next part. We then moved to Tsunade's residence to attempt to retrace her steps, only to find that a great deal of her possessions, clothing, tools, and books, for instance, were missing. Deer barely managed to keep from jumping back as a small burst of killing intent swept the room. The Hokage's face became grim as he motioned for his ANBU to continue the report. Shizen-san's residence appears undisturbed, but we can't be certain. The Inuzuka also reported that the scent trail found at the apartment was noticeably stronger than at the place where they were last sighted, leading us to conclude that the persons sighted were, in fact, clones. Despite this new lead, the Inuzuka were still unable to find any scent trail outside of Konoha. The Hokage's voice was cold as he spoke. What are your conclusions, dear? The ANBU hesitated a moment before he continued. It would appear that Tsunade-sama and Shizen-san were using clones and the cover of the visit to Otafukagai in order to confuse and delay anyone trying to find them. We estimate that they may have left as much as 24 hours prior to their last sighting. You think they have gone missing? That is the only conclusion that fits the facts we have available, Hokage-sama. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. How many people know about this? ANBU Squad's dog, Wolf, and Falcon, along with teams Tsum, Mishiro, and Hatsuki. Dragon-sama is likely aware as well. I want those teams sequestered in ANBU HQ immediately. Find out if they've talked to anyone and detain those people as well. If more than 20 people know, come back to me for further instructions, the Hokage snapped. Also, have Dragon and Kensuke report to me at once, priority black. Deer bowed and left quickly, grateful to escape the office intact. The Hokage leaned back in his chair as he contemplated the situation. He found it difficult to believe Tsunade would simply abandon the village. He had certainly misread his students before, though, he admitted to himself bitterly. Orochimaru's madness and treachery made it clear that his perception when it came to his students was far from perfect. Tsunade exhibited none of the warning signs that Orochimaru had, however there was no odd behavior or strange disappearances, no unexplained gaps in her time within the village. Other than this last week, at any rate. His secretary interrupted his thoughts, informing him that one of his jounin was here to see him. The jounin bowed nervously and immediately began his report once he was in the office. Hokage-sama, my team was assigned the mission to maintain the Namikaze compound this week. However, we were unable to gain entrance this morning. The blood seal on the gate has activated, the Hokage growled softly under his breath. This was probably some sort of automatic defense Minato had added. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Minato had sacrificed himself, and it would be just like him to prepare for this sort of contingency. This also reminded him that he needed to go through Minato's lab and make sure everything was secured and stored away. Although, now that he was thinking about it, it would probably be better if Jiraiya did that. He would have a better idea of how to organize everything properly anyway. This was assuming, of course, that he could convince Jiraiya to even enter the house. The Toad Sage was taking Minato's death hard and was still having trouble coming to grips with it. Thank you for informing me. Have your team come back tomorrow. I should have the issue resolved by then. Understood, Hokage-sama. Same day, -1:30 p.m. Outside the Namikaze compound, the Hokage poured the vial of blood he had personally collected from Kushina just a few short minutes ago onto the blood seal. Though Minato and Kushina had never officially married or even revealed their relationship, a mutual decision to avoid complications within and without the village, though they knew the secret would eventually leak out anyway, Sarutobi knew that Minato had added Kushina to the blood seal that guarded his compound long ago. Sarutobi frowned when the seal did not deactivate as he had expected. He stared at the vial in his hand for a long moment before his face paled and he vanished in a shunshin. Same day, -1:30 p.m. ANBU prison. Open that cell now! The Hokage roared, anger etched clearly on his face. The ANBU jerked to attention and hastened to comply, eager to do whatever he could to appease the furious Hokage. Sarutobi charged into the room and stopped next to the bed, staring down at the figure bound there. It certainly looked like Kushina. He flared his chakra to dispel any illusions hiding the true form. Nothing changed. Frowning, he focused and poured far more chakra into his efforts, actually forming a ram's seal and calling out the name of the technique for the first time in years. Kai, there! The form rippled slightly under the force of his jutsu. He knew of only one genjutsu that could withstand such a concentrated assault, Tsunade's personal genjutsu that she used to hide her age. She had actually explained how it worked to him, years ago, happy to indulge his curiosity and still a little eager to impress her teacher. Thanks to that discussion, he also knew how to dispel it. He laid his hand on Kushina's forehead and began rapidly pulsing his chakra, adjusting it slightly with each pulse until the illusion shattered. His face darkened when he saw Shizen bound to the bed, her face restful and relaxed as she dozed away under the influence of the sedatives. Get me a Yamanaka, he said, his voice razor sharp. Same day, -5:00 p.m. ANBU prison. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama, but I have not found any clear evidence. The drugs she was under have scrambled her recent memories, and she can't fully differentiate between dream and reality for the events leading up to her visit to the prison. I found no less than 5 different versions of the events that may or may not have actually occurred that led to her being in that cell. Was she a willing participant in any of them? In one of them, yes, the Yamanaka finally admitted. And the others? She was coerced into it, ambushed once she entered the cell, hit with a genjutsu, or, seduced into it. Seduced? The Hokage echoed, his voice faintly incredulous. By whom? I'd rather not say, Hokage-sama, as such information is highly personal in nature and I do not believe that to be the true version of events in any case. I cannot be certain any of them are, actually. Very well. That aside, in your professional opinion, do you believe that she is a willing accomplice? In my professional opinion, Hokage-sama, the evidence is inconclusive. Her psych profile suggests extreme devotion to her teacher, but her mind also shows signs of feeling betrayed. In her defense, I was able to confirm that she still feels loyal to Konoha. She also feels a strong drive to protect and shelter Naruto above and beyond assisting her teacher, though her feelings are somewhat tumultuous on that subject. The Hokage frowned thoughtfully. Do you feel a more thorough investigation is merited? The Yamanaka winced. I believe that would be excessive, Hokage-sama. The damage incurred by such an approach would be considerable, and I do not feel there is sufficient evidence of either guilt in this specific matter or treachery in general to call for such extreme measures. I will take that under advisement. Thank you for your time. You are dismissed. November 3rd, 334 NE. Well, we seem to be in the clear, Tsunade said. No sign of any tracker teams in over 2 weeks. Now we need to secure a base of operations. I may have an idea, Kushina said, frowning thoughtfully. July 20th. 347 NE-7:30 AM. Otafia Kagai. Tsunade sighed. If he just left Naruto near Kushina, we may have been able to convince her to stay in Konoha. But once she thought someone else was trying to take Naruto from her, well, that pretty much sealed it. Jiraiya shook his head sadly, dismissing thoughts of what might have been. Well, I'm sure you didn't have me come here just to rehash bad memories. What do you need? Another mission? More supplies? Tsunade shook her head. No, we've been doing fine on that front. I'm actually here to help you for a change, or really help Naruto by helping you. Jiraiya smirked. Oh? I'm listening. We were recently approached about a job involving Konoha. Apparently there's going to be a big commotion during the 3rd phase that we're supposed to take advantage of. We were offered a choice of several targets to kidnap, with bounties ranging from 5 million Ryo to 100 million. Jiraiya choked. 100 million? Who would shit? That's for Naruto, isn't it? Got it in one. There were 2 Hyuga and 3 Uchiha for 5 million Ryo each, and Anko Mitarashi for 25 million. We managed to snag both Naruto and Mitarashi, but we have no idea who will be going after the others, or even if that was the full list. They made it sound like we were given first choice, but it wouldn't surprise me if they told everyone that. The Byakugan, the Sharingan, a Jinchuriki, and Anko, Jiraiya said, thinking out loud. Obviously someone wants the bloodlines, but who would want Anko and the kid, who all knows about her cursed seal? Tsunade asked. Most of the Jounin in Konoha, I'd say. It was a fairly big deal when she first came back, but once I sealed it off and cleared her for duty it mostly died down, and no one really talks about it now. Oddly enough, more people know Naruto's the container of the tailed beast, since so many clans can detect the presence of the tailed beast, or have to know about him for their own safety. Anyway, do you have any more info on this disturbance? Or who is offering up all this money? Not much. Our contact in the Eastern Dragons said clients, plural, but that's what they always say. As for the disturbance, he specifically said it had nothing to do with the Fire Lord or any of the nobles, and that security would be distracted dealing with it, allowing an opening to kidnap the various targets. How certain were they? They offered a free pass if the distraction didn't show up, which means they are damn sure it's going to. You have any ideas what it could be? Jiraiya's face darkened as he thought back to the revelations from Baki and his team. Yeah, I can think of a few. July 22nd, 347 NE-11:00 AM. Near the border between the Land of Rain and the Land of Fire. Sensei! One of the genin suddenly called out, stumbling to a halt. The rest of the genin and jounin came to a stop as well, turning curiously. What is it? One the jounin asked. The stone is vibrating again, the genin replied, pulling the small rock out of his pocket. The other ninja exchanged confused glances. When did it start doing that? His sensei asked. Just now. and it seems to be getting stronger. It didn't do this last time we passed through here, did it? No, sensei. The genin exchanged confused glances, but the jounin began eyeing their surroundings warily. They hadn't overlooked the fact that their commander wanted them to mark who was in the vicinity when the stones vibrated. They were meant to detect something very specific, which meant there was someone else out here with them. That they couldn't detect anything meant that, whoever it was, they were very skilled and thus very dangerous. Sensei! It's getting really strong now, the genin called out, holding the stone in his palm. Sure enough, the rock was beginning to jump about in his hand. Stay out. The jounin's words ended abruptly as his throat was torn out, the blood spraying into the air. The jounin reacted swiftly, their weapons in their hands moments later as they moved to intercept the blur that had killed their comrade. The genin could only stare in shock as the light faded from their teacher's eyes. The battle paused momentarily as a long clang rang out in the clearing. The two aimed jounin were pressing their kunai against a large metal staff, trying to leverage their combined strength to overpower their opponent. They were also warily eyeing the strange hook blades that capped each end of the staff, noting the blood that was slowly dripping from the point of the smaller blade. The other ninja was holding his staff in two hands and did not appear to be struggling, even against their combined strength. A green scarf was pulled up to hide the bottom half of his face, but his pink eyes and gray hair were clearly visible. Who are you? Demanded one of the aimed jounin angrily. The other ninja didn't reply, instead pulling one of his hands off the staff and raising it in front of his face. The aimed ninja paled when they pressed harder against the staff and it still didn't budge an inch. Then the ninja began forming hand signs with his free hand. The aimed jounin sprang back, flinging kunai that were effortlessly deflected by the staff. Run! They yelled at the genin. Head for aim and don't stop. Water release. 8-armed embrace, the enemy ninja intoned softly. Water seemed to form from the very air behind the ninja, forming 8 large, long arms that hovered in the air for a brief moment before lashing out. 2 of them headed for the jounin, while the other 6 went for the genin, the watery arms stretching swiftly and easily. The jounin managed to evade the first strike, but all of the genin were captured immediately. They struggled helplessly against the water, but their bonds might as well have been formed of solid steel for all they accomplished. The jounin cursed and turned their attention back to their attacker, their hands flashing through hand signs. They never got the opportunity to finish their jutsu, however, as the hook staff flashed out from behind them. One brought his hands up to try to stop the blood streaming from his throat, while the other found himself lifted into the air by the large hook that had pierced his shoulder. He managed to stifle his scream of pain even as he stared disbelievingly at the image of the attacker that flickered and faded, revealing itself to have been a bunshin. He never noticed his enemy make the switch or felt the flare of chakra that accompanied the technique. His good hand moved towards his kunai pouch to try one last desperate attack, but he was whipped through the air and slammed into a tree headfirst, and he knew no more. Yagura dropped the unconscious aimed jounin to the ground and shook the blood off of his staff. Turning his attention back to the captured genin, he began approaching them at a leisurely pace as he secured his staff on his back once again. What do you want? One of the genin cried, echoed by his comrades. Yagura ignored them, instead stooping to pick up the stone that was even now hopping back and forth on the ground as it bounced around. As soon as he touched it, the stone shattered. Small wisps of dark red energy drifted up from the broken remains. Blue energy streamed forth from Yagura's hand, coiling around the wisps of energy before retreating back into his body. He tensed and cocked his head slightly, then scowled. Just as we thought then, he said out loud, confusing the watching genin. Will this serve as confirmation enough for you? Good, saves us a lot of trouble then. What are you talking about? Another genin asked hesitantly. Yagura continued to ignore them. He moved towards the genin and began rifling through the pouches, finding 2 more stones which immediately shattered and released more energy along with a series of papers filled with notes. He eyed the papers critically for a moment before turning to the genin. What code did you use? Like we'd tell you. One of the genin spat. Yagura's hand twitched and that genin found himself completely engulfed by the watery arm that was holding him. He began thrashing around in the water as his air ran out while the other genin watching in horrified disbelief. What code did you use? Yagura repeated, looking at the other genin. We'll tell. The genin's teammate cried. Just let him go. Yagura's hand twitched again, and the drowning genin's head poked out of the water. He began coughing and hacking as he drew in lungfuls of air. I'm waiting, Yagura said evenly. After the genin had revealed the key to the code, Yagura spent the next 10 minutes translating and reading through their notes. Once he was finished, he turned his attention back to the genin, who flinched slightly, wondering what this madman would do next. Why did you make these notes? he asked. That was our mission during the exams. What are the stones for? We don't know, exactly. We were just told to record where the stones vibrated and who was in the area. Yugura referred to the notes again. After a few seconds, he nodded. I agree, he said. It has to be one of those two. Fortunately, they're on the same team, so if we find one, we'll almost certainly find the other. He gathered up all of the notes and held them up in front of his face as he breathed out a small stream of fire. Once the notes had been completely destroyed, he walked over to the Jounin. It took him a few minutes to bind the man's wound and rouse him from unconsciousness. I have a few questions for you, Yugura said. July 22nd, 347 NE, 12:00 p.m. The Jounin panted harshly as he finished explaining everything he knew about the tailed beasts and Junshiriki, which was very little. His captor's questions had ranged from the defensive layout of AIM, which he had refused to divulge, even under threat of death, to his leader's appearance, companions, and personal habits. He had revealed some information, enough to keep his captor satisfied, without revealing any of the secrets he held that might compromise his village. The questioning had also made him realize just how little he knew about his leader, which he found slightly disconcerting in retrospect. Do you have any other questions? Yugura asked. The Jounin flinched. He had learned quickly how to tell when his captor was talking to himself and not interrupt or comment. The first time had been unpleasant, the second painful, and he made sure there wasn't a third. Neither do I, Yugura said. Yes, I'll take care of it. Yugura turned his attention back to the Jounin. You were reasonably cooperative, and for that I will make this quick, he said, before driving a kunai into his captive's heart. The genin screamed in protest and struggled against their watery bonds that had kept them captive for nearly an hour. Why? One of them cried out. He told you everything you wanted to know. Yugura shrugged apologetically. Your village has declared war against my kind. If you must blame someone, blame your leader. His hand twitched, and the clearing fell silent. July 23rd, 347 NE, 2:00 p.m. Hokage's office. Hey Hokage-ji-san, you wanted to see me? Kusha said as he strolled into the office. The Hokage wasn't at his desk as he normally was, though, instead standing at the window and staring out at the village. Indeed I did, the Hokage replied, not turning around. I have something very important I want to talk to you about. Anbu, please give us some privacy. There was no response for a long moment before 4 Anbu appeared behind the Hokage, kneeling with one fist planted on the wooden floor. Hokage-sama? One asked. Privacy, please, the Hokage repeated, still not turning around. Very well, Hokage-sama, the Anbu replied, vanishing. Kusha felt them move just outside the room. After they had left, the door clicked shut behind them and the locking seals flared to life once more. The Hokage continued to stare out at the village. Kusha was about to repeat his earlier question when the old man finally spoke. I have lived in this village all of my life, he began, his voice filled with nostalgia. I was born here 68 years ago, graduated from the academy at the age of 9, and was placed on a genin team led by the second Hokage. I have fought in and survived all 3 great ninja wars, and was appointed Hokage in one of the last battles in the First Great War. I led this village both on and off the battlefield during the Second and Third Wars, striving to protect as many people as I could. There were hardships and sacrifices, but in the end the village survived and even prospered. I have dedicated my life to serving this village, and I don't think it is arrogant to say that I have done well. Konoha is the strongest village in the elemental nations, and I am proud to be her leader and to serve with the many loyal and dedicated ninja who call her home. My greatest comfort, however, is the knowledge that my legacy will live on long after I have passed. Kusha shifted uneasily. The Hokage still hadn't turned to face him, instead staring out the window the entire time. He'd never seen the Hokage like this before, and it worried him that the old man he thought he knew so well could surprise him. I thought to enjoy my retirement when I passed the title on to Minato, safe in the knowledge that I had found a successor who would in time surpass me and who was every bit as dedicated to this village as I was. When he fell 12 years ago, I reluctantly took back the title and once more dedicated my life to this village, knowing that I was the only real option at the time and that my village would need me to recover. These past 12 years have been, in many ways, the most difficult of my life. I was old then, and feel older now. The problems seem to just pile up faster than they used to, or perhaps I have simply grown tired of it all. Ever since my wife died, I find myself wondering why I keep going on. If Minato were still Hokage, I probably would have died already, if only to join her in the afterlife. As it is, I find my will of fire burning a little less brightly every day. One day, and it shall be sooner rather than later, I think, it will extinguish entirely. He sighed quietly. still staring out the window. Kushu stared at the Hokage's back. He had absolutely no idea why the Hokage was telling him this. He'd almost think the old man was going to appoint him his successor, but no matter how impressive he was already, he didn't think the old man was so desperate as to appoint a 13-year-old as the Hokage. Ji-san, he started to say, but the Hokage resumed speaking. However, it has not extinguished yet, nor am I ready to give up protecting this village. The Hokage finally turned from the window, allowing Kushu to see the old man's face as he moved over to sit behind his desk. There was no emotion there. It was a cold mask that could have been carved from granite. His eyes were burning with intensity, however, as they settled on Kushu's form. Even as Kushu absorbed this, the Hokage placed his hand on the desk and seals began flaring to life all over the office. There must have been hundreds of them, and they all seemed to be some variation of barrier or protection seals. They were all focused inward, however, designed to contain something rather than repel something, and it soon became obvious why. Layered over all of them were several very large explosive seals, shining brightly with stored chakra. The death god stated that the tailed beast would be banished for a period of 100 years upon the failure of the seal. So, tell me why I shouldn't make my last act as Hokage to start that period of banishment right now, tailed beast. Kushu just gaped at the Hokage for a long moment, unable to process the rapidly changing situation. After a few seconds he snapped out of his shock and put on a confused face. What are you talking about, Hokage-ji-san? There was the tiniest moment of hesitation on the Hokage's part, but he shook his head slightly and his face grew even stonier. Do not play games with me, tailed beast. I did not come to this course of action without being certain. Kushu continued to stare at the Hokage for several seconds, maintaining his confused expression. The Hokage's face never twitched, and the intensity in his gaze never wavered. Finally, he sighed and dropped his act, slowly walking over to sit on one of the chairs facing the Hokage's desk. 12 years and it comes to this, he said, staring straight at the Hokage. The Hokage tensed slightly, his face paling a little. Kushu smirked in response. Ah, so you weren't quite as certain as you claimed, were you? Or perhaps you held out hope that you were mistaken, that you could dismiss all of this as a bad dream. Ironic, since I have had similar thoughts myself. The Hokage said nothing, his eyes boring into Kushu's. So what now? Kushu continued. Do you expect me to beg and plead for my life? Are you going to find another way to steal my power for yourself or your village? The Hokage frowned. We did not, he began, but was interrupted by Kushu's sharp, barking laugh. Ha! I may not have seen this coming, old man, but I am no fool. Ninja are always looking for new ways to gain power, and Jinchuriki are as powerful as it gets. A single adult Jinchuriki is considered a credible threat to any Kage. I doubt it's a coincidence that your ninja began assaulting me the moment I returned to the human realm, an assault that led to my sealing. Kushu observed the Hokage's reactions with some satisfaction. The old man had tried to seize control of this confrontation with those explosive seals, but Kushu wasn't about to let that stand. He had no intention of talking with the Hokage from a position of weakness. The Hokage scowled. We were acting in self-defense, he snapped. You would have destroyed the village had we not stopped you. Really? Kushu asked mockingly. How much of your village did I damage exactly? The Hokage opened his mouth to reply, then paused, taken aback. Good, the old man was even more off balance now. Kushu mentally smirked as he continued to erode the Hokage's defense bit by bit. The answer you are having trouble saying is none. I damaged nothing and killed no one within this village. You killed hundreds of ninja. The Hokage countered angrily. I was acting in self-defense, Kushu replied smugly, throwing the Hokage's earlier words back in his face. Your ninja launched the first strike and never stopped. I believe I never even got within 2 miles of the village I was supposedly bent on destroying. The Hokage scowled but could not refute his words. He had been present when Minato gave the orders, and it was true that they had launched what they believed to be a preemptive strike against the tailed beast. Since we're having this little discussion, I've got a question for you, Kushu said. How did you get your hands on the death god's seal? Kushu had always wondered about that, and his curiosity had only grown when he read the scroll Itachi had brought him. The Hokage frowned thoughtfully, carefully considering his reply. Minato was studying the seal out of curiosity for some time prior to your attack. How convenient. Your successor just happens to be studying the very seal that banished me shortly before I return. Banished you? The Hokage asked, startled. You are clearly still in this realm, he said. This is not the first time I have been sealed. It would be 112 years ago now that I was first sealed. I was attacked for no reason while relaxing in the grasslands far to the west of here. The Land of Wind, I believe you call it. The Hokage's eyes grew wide. Yes, I'm sure you recall the so-called sealing experiment that devastated the area. That incident occurred when I destroyed the seal that bound me then, Kushu said, slowly rising from his chair and moving to stand next to the window. The blood drained from the Hokage's face. He remained nearly motionless as his eyes followed Kushu's movements. It really is a remarkable view from here, Kushu said. You can see most of the village that you love so much. He paused, raising his hand to stroke his chin thoughtfully. How large would you say this village is? 5 miles across? Perhaps 6? The Hokage didn't reply. His eyes locked on Kushu's form. How large do you think the explosion was that devastated the Land of Wind? The Hokage flinched, but remained silent. Kushu turned, a vicious smile on his face as he walked past the Hokage and returned to his seat. His eyes bored into the Hokage's own, and he allowed his yuki to bleed into his eyes, completing their change to blood-red eyes with a black vertical slit. He also began leaking some of his killing intent, filling the room with an oppressive aura. The old man bore it well, but Kushu could see his breathing becoming labored and beads of sweat forming on his brow. You can try to destroy me with those explosive seals, Kushu said, his voice cold, but if you think by doing so you'll protect your village, you are rather sorely mistaken. So what will it be, Hokage? Chapter 29, What Shall It Be? July 23rd, 347 NE-2:15 p.m. Hokage's office. The Hokage swallowed thickly before he replied, his voice hoarse. You're bluffing. You have no proof that will happen. Kushu smirked condescendingly. True, I can't prove that destroying this body will cause destruction of that magnitude without actually doing so. However, if you'll recall the death god's words, he specifically said banished once again. Why would he say that if I had never been banished before? The Hokage stared at Kushu for several seconds before he slumped back in his chair. The explosive seals slowly faded from view, though the privacy seals and other seals protecting the office from infiltration or eavesdropping remained active. Kushu nodded in satisfaction. The Hokage's gamble had failed while his had succeeded. Kushu himself wasn't entirely certain what would happen if some external force destroyed his body, but he suspected that it would not, in fact, result in such devastation. With Ino still inside Konoha, he also had no intention of destroying the seal himself, but the Hokage certainly didn't need to know that. It was debatable whether anyone else in the village would stay his hand, but it was a moot point at the moment. Silence reigned for nearly a minute as Kushu watched the Hokage. The old man's face was hidden from view by his hat, but his overall demeanor spoke of defeat. Kushu was actually rather surprised when the Hokage finally looked up, as his eyes were still sharp. It seemed he had not entirely broken the Hokage's spirit after all. I am still not convinced that you are not a threat to this village, the Hokage said finally, his voice firm. Kushu stifled his irritation, instead nodding respectfully at the old man as if he had made a good point. Of course he was a threat, but a combative attitude would probably not help at this point. What would it take to convince you then? I need more information, the Hokage replied immediately, his voice sharp. I need to know what you are and what you want. Once I have those answers, then perhaps we can come to some sort of understanding. Kushu snorted slightly at his choice of words, but nodded in agreement. Ask away then. Why were you approaching this village 12 years ago? Honestly, I can't say I was approaching the village, as I didn't even know it was there. Even if I had known, I would not have cared. There was no sign of my brethren in the area, and so no reason for me to remain. I had far more important things to do than bother with an insignificant human settlement. That he would have been perfectly willing to blast his way through the village should he have decided it was necessary or expedient he left unsaid. That particular insight wouldn't steer the conversation the way he wanted it to go. The Hokage seemed particularly weak to guilt, so guilt he would get. Why did you kill all those ninja then? The Hokage asked, his voice biting. Because they attacked me. Seeing the Hokage flinch, Kushu smirked and nodded. Yes, that's right. If you had simply left me alone, none of those ninja would have died, including the fourth Hokage and his son. The Hokage looked away, his expression pained, before his eyes snapped back to Kushu. You know? Of course I know, Kushu replied. I was aware of everything that happened to this body. I know who Naruto's parents are, and I'm also aware of that confrontation you had with this body's mother. And still you dare to claim that didn't seal me for my power. You stole her son because you were unwilling to let go of your newfound Jinchuriki. Among my kind, such an act would be considered sacrilege. Yes, that is the closest word, a crime of the highest order. Guilt warred with anger on the Hokage's face before he regained control of his emotions. When did you kill Naruto? He asked rather than responding to Kushu's latest accusation. Kushu just laughed. Oh, I never harmed him at all. You can thank the fourth for that one. Minato would never kill his own son. The Hokage shouted, slamming his hand on his desk. You killed him and took over somehow after the sealing. Kushu just shook his head. I'm sure it makes you feel better to think so, but you already know exactly what killed him, and when. All within death's domain and the boundaries shall be taken in payment, he quoted, repeating the words the death god had spoken that day. You merely assumed Naruto was excluded from that because he was still alive after the sealing. He was not. Every moment after the sealing has been me, and only me. Seeing the horror etched on the Hokage's face, Kushu couldn't resist adding one more jibe. Face it, old man. The only time I ever harmed anyone or anything related to this village was in response to something Konoha started. You literally have no one to blame but yourselves. That seemed to have broken his spirit at last, judging by the haunted look in the old man's eyes. Which meant now was the perfect time to start getting something useful out of this conversation, other than the satisfaction he took from mocking one of his chief captors. He knew that Sarutobi wasn't directly to blame, but then the old man had just threatened to destroy everything he had spent the last 12 years working for. A little payback seemed appropriate. However, Kusha said slowly, pulling the Hokage's attention away from his self-recrimination, that isn't to say I view Konoha as my enemy. You aren't worthy of such a distinction. Even if you didn't know it was me, you have been kind over the years. Access to your knowledge has been very useful. Having seen what my younger brother went through, it's also clear that my situation could have been far, far worse. Although if anyone had tried that with me personally, they would have come to regret it very quickly. Get any ideas of changing my seal and I will destroy you. Kusha plastered a pleasant smile on his face as he stared at the Hokage. It didn't matter whether the old man took his words at face value or not. Either message would suit his purposes. The Hokage mustered up enough energy to look confused. Younger brother? Yes, the one you know as the one-tailed beast. Currently bound within Gaara, though under much improved conditions. He seems to have come through the experience mostly intact, thankfully. Sarutobi stared at him for a long moment. What are the tailed beasts? He asked finally. Well, first of all, we are not tailed beasts. We are properly known as Bijou, and we are something rather unique. You already think of us as immortal beings of immense power, but we are also intelligent. We have lived many, many years, after all, so it should be no surprise that we've learned a few tricks here and there. If we were truly bent on destroying the world, we would have had plenty of time to do so. The Hokage seemed to be recovering from his earlier depression and responded quickly. The tailed beasts, or Bijou, rather, only appeared a little over 100 years ago, and immediately began causing destruction wherever they went. Wrong, Kushu replied flatly, an annoyed expression on his face. The Hokage frowned at his response. That is the earliest recorded sighting of a Ta Bijou. No one has ever reported any peaceful contact of any kind, and wrong again. We have walked this world for hundreds of years. I won't claim we never killed anyone at all, but we did not view humanity as an enemy or even a potential threat. If anything, you amused us. We amused you? The Hokage asked angrily. Kusha shrugged. As I said, we have lived a very long time, and you humans were something new and different. With so many of you doing so many different things, there was always something interesting to witness. When did you first enter the human realm? And why is knowledge of the different realms forbidden? Kusha began to respond, then blinked. With a grin slowly spreading across his face, he replied, Oh, forbidden is it? Someone's been letting things slip. Why is it forbidden? The Hokage asked again. Why is it so important that we don't know about it? Well, it rather depends on your perspective, I suppose. Such knowledge is not forbidden to me or my brethren. We may travel as we wish and share it with anyone we care to. For the ones you know as summons, however, the situation is very different. To put it in terms you would be familiar with, they started a war in someone else's country, lost, and had to pay reparations. The Hokage thought for a few moments, attempting to translate that vague statement. What country did they start a war in? The human realm, Kusha replied, grinning. They attacked the human realm? The Hokage asked, shocked and disbelieving. Kusha shook his head. No, they've always had rather friendly relations with humans, actually. They attacked us, but they made the mistake of doing it here. I don't understand, the Hokage finally admitted. Why would it matter if they fought you here or elsewhere? Well, since you know enough to be asking these questions in the first place, I suppose I should fill you in the rest of it. It'll be an interesting experience, lecturing the professor. With a small smirk at the slightly irritated look on Sarutobi's face, he began. Reality as you know it is divided into 4 realms. The human realm, this one. The outer realm, where the so-called summoned tribes live. The demon realm, where myself and my brethren originate, and the divine realm, where the one you refer to as Kami resides. There's rather more to it, of course, but that will suffice to give you the basic idea. The Hokage's jaw dropped open. Kami exists? He asked, stunned. Kushi just raised an eyebrow. You know of the death god but didn't think Kami existed? That's rather ironic, since they are for all intents and purposes the same being. The Hokage's jaw sagged even further before he closed it with an audible snap. Collecting himself, he cleared his throat and said, That's just rather surprising. We have proof of the death god, but no one has ever summoned or even claimed to have communicated with Kami in a meaningful fashion. Well, they wouldn't, would they? Kami only manifests in the realm as the death god. Why? Kushi shrugged. I couldn't tell you the reasoning, only that everything Kami does has a law behind it. Which leads us back to my little lesson. The summoned tribes had been visiting the human realm for many years before we showed up, and they didn't like our intrusion. This was not our first encounter with the summons, of course. They have always showed a tendency to explore and had actually entered the demon realm several times in the past. Their incursions have always been met with fierce resistance, and resulted in what you would call a war. Of course, to demonkind war has very different connotations, since it's so much harder to kill us. You said you were immortal, the Hokage interrupted. The Bijou are immortal. Other demons are just very hard to kill. Even in the worst wars, it's actually very rare for a demon to permanently die. Instead, they merely lose some of their power or energy, or in extreme cases lose cohesion entirely for a long period of time. They will eventually recover, however. At any rate, our relationship with the outer realm was set by that first encounter, and they have always met us with hostility thereafter. This was the first time we had met in the human realm, and they reacted as they always did, by attacking us. And, as they always did, they lost. Our battle did considerable damage to the human realm, however, and that's where Kami got involved. You see, Kami also views the human realm as under his protection, and unlike the summons, Kami has the power to enforce his rule. Apparently one of his laws is that the human realm is to be considered neutral ground. Any damage caused by battles that were not instigated by the natives will be punished. Sarutobi's eyes widened. Then you? Yes, I would not have started anything. Unfortunately for you, he said, patting his stomach where the seal was located, this most certainly counts as instigation. Then why would the death god seal you away if you were not at fault? The Hokage pointed out, thinking he had found a flaw in the Bijou's story. That is an entirely separate law, Kushi replied easily. You'll notice that he said quite clearly that demonkind do not fall under his domain. Without studying the jutsu used to summon the death god, however, I could not tell you what that law is, merely what it does. My best guess is that it is some form of exchange, the lives of everyone and everything in the area to seal the target. Getting back to the matter at hand, since the summons started the war, they were held accountable for the damage. As part of their reparations, they had to give up their right to travel the realms. The Hokage nodded thoughtfully, reconciling what the Bijou had told him with what Jiraiya had gathered from the toads and his own discussions with Enma, and coming up short. There were some definite gaps in the story. How are the summoned tribes able to travel the realms now? Strictly speaking, they don't. When you summon one of them, you actually get what amounts to a very powerful and durable clone. The real summon is still in the outer realm. I see, that would explain why they never retain their wounds, except for when Gamabunta fought you. How does that work? Kushu smirked, holding up his hand and letting a small bit of his yuki curl off of it. The red energy streamed into the air and waved slowly about, causing the Hokage to tense slightly. Kushi noted that none of the seal in the room flared in warning or reacted to his yuki in any discernible fashion. That is something you don't need to know, he said finally, still smirking. He was of course leaving out a great deal of information that would either present the Bijou in a more menacing light, or that could possibly be used against demonkind in the future. His yuki, as with that of his brethren, was actually incredibly dangerous to the Outlings, which is part of the reason they reacted so negatively to the Bijou's presence in the human realm. Damage inflicted by the Bijou went far beyond the physical where Outlings were concerned, and his own yuki was worse still. Gamabunta was lucky the residual yuki in his wounds had been pulled into the seal along with the rest of his energy, or the Outling would not have survived the hour. How do you know what happens when we summon one of them? The contract spells it out rather clearly, Kushi replied offhandedly. The Hokage blinked slowly before asking, You can read the contract? What language is it? Kushi shook his head. Let's save that topic for another time, shall we? Jiraiya's summation of the terms of the contract had been quite accurate, actually, if lacking in the particulars. allowing the Hokage to think there was more information to be gained than there actually was would strengthen his position for later talks. The Hokage frowned, but didn't press the issue. Why were the summoned tribes on the verge of extinction? He asked next. Kushu shrugged again. They lost badly, he answered. And the Bijou may have traveled to the outer realm, and may have laid waste to great swaths of it in retaliation for their attacks in the human realm. Another bit of knowledge Sarutobi didn't need to know just yet, if ever. Kushu chuckled slightly, remembering his personal visit to the lands of the dragon tribe. That tribe had been particularly aggressive in their attacks in the demon realm, and he had taken great pleasure in wiping them out permanently. That they were also the ones who had killed Ryudo, or so it had appeared at the time, may have also had something to do with it. Yes, he had enjoyed that very much indeed. If the summons are so outmatched, why would they continue to attack you? Kushu shrugged again. Why does Kiba insist that he can beat me every time we fight? Why do the minor villages insist I'm competing with Konoha? They just can't admit that they have no chance, and so continue to throw themselves into battle again and again. The Hokage knew that the Bijou wasn't telling him everything, but he had no idea what it would be or how to pull it out of him. Frowning deeper in frustration, he moved on. That still doesn't explain why the summoned tribes can't share that knowledge. That was my sister's idea, actually. You see, the summoned tribes had been visiting the human realm for a long time, but no humans have ever traveled the realms, have they? Which means that the summoned tribes never shared that knowledge before, preferring to keep it to themselves. However, they had also become rather used to dealing with humans on a frequent basis, and certain aspects of their existence had become dependent on your kind. Now that they could no longer travel freely, it seemed rather fitting that their prior secrecy come back to haunt them. And, as the injured party, we had the right to influence their punishment to a certain extent. Sarutobi mulled that over. He got the feeling that the animosity between the summoned tribes and the Bijou went a lot deeper than he was making it seem. But there was also a certain amount of truth there. Enma himself had admitted that the summoned tribes had been visiting the human realm for thousands of years, and yet no humans that he knew of had ever traveled the realms without the summoned tribe's assistance. In fact, before the Toads made Jiraiya that offer, Sarutobi didn't think any human even knew there was such a thing as another realm. He had certainly not been aware of it on the few occasions he visited the home of the monkeys. If the summoned tribes are forbidden from talking about the other realms, then why could they tell us now? That I do not know the answer to. As they have not triggered Kami's wrath, however, they did not violate their punishment in doing so. I myself would be most interested in finding out what loophole they have discovered. How did you find out? That doesn't seem relevant to our discussion, the Hokage replied quickly. Kushu scowled. If you are going to refuse to answer my questions, then I don't see much purpose in answering yours. You are attempting to convince me you mean no harm to this village, the Hokage countered, a matching scowl forming on his own face, something which you have yet to accomplish. Kushu's face settled back into a neutral expression as he eyed the Hokage. The old man was proving rather stubborn, despite the many painful revelations he had endured so far. Upon further consideration, it shouldn't be so surprising, though. The man had been Hokage for the majority of his life, and he would surely have experience dealing with unpleasant topics. Then it would seem we are at an impasse, Hokage, as you still seem to think you can dictate the terms of this conversation. I am not some foolish child or insubordinate ninja to be reprimanded. I am older than you by millennia, and have led a village of my own for centuries. So you claim, the Hokage pointed out. There is no actual proof of any of that. His expression shifted into a triumphant smirk as he stared at the Bijou expectantly. Kushu's face darkened and twisted into a snarl, and he almost lashed out to destroy the old man where he sat. Almost. Instead, his face cleared and he began chuckling, startling the Hokage. Oh, you're good, aren't you? Kushu said, his voice filled with mirth. You've been trying to play me this whole time. The Hokage's eyes widened slightly in surprise before he mastered his expression once again. But that was all the confirmation Kushu needed. You've been trying to trick me into revealing something, either by shocking me with the explosive seals, playing up your defeated attitude, or pretending to dismiss everything I have said in this conversation as a fabrication. The Hokage didn't reply, although there was a calculating gleam in his eye. A dangerous approach, to try my temper so, but you've already shown that you were prepared to sacrifice your own life to defend this village. Kushu lapsed into thoughtful silence for a moment, then nodded decisively. Very well, I'll play along for a bit. Let's look at things from your perspective, shall we? He stood and moved closer to the Hokage's desk as he began to pace back and forth. I think we can both agree that I am intelligent, or at least sentient, so I can possibly be reasoned with. At the very least I am not a mindless beast, yes? As he spoke, he released several small streams of yuki from his feet and sent them towards the Hokage, making sure that they were hidden from the old man's view. The released yuki began to pool under the desk, out of sight. The Hokage nodded carefully, betraying no emotion. Have I done anything in my time as Naruto to harm this village? Kush asked. He kept careful watch on the seals around the room as he continued to pace back and forth, but none of them showed any signs of reacting to his yuki. The Hokage seemed similarly unaware, as expected. His experiments with Ino had shown that when he twisted his yuki the right way it was very difficult for humans to detect. The seals gave off enough chakra of their own to mask the few traces that remained. The Hokage frowned before replying, "Not that I am aware of, no. So we have two options to explain my behavior. Either I have no intention of harming this village, or I am still too weak to do so. Would you agree with that analysis?" The yuki began seeping through the Hokage's sandals and into his skin. It was incredibly fortunate that he had taken the time to experiment within the forest of death and managed to figure out how to send his yuki into other people's bodies without being detected. He would have been forced to take a far more direct approach otherwise. The Hokage watched him warily. "There is also the possibility that you have managed to harm this village in ways that we have yet to detect, or that you are biding your time for some reason other than inability to act," he added. "You must think very highly of my subtlety and patience, then," Kusha said, smiling pleasantly. "I'm flattered." The rest of the yuki hidden under the desk exploded upwards, wrapping around Sarutobi's form and slamming him into the wall in the blink of an eye. The yuki already present within the Hokage's body was hard at work disrupting his chakra control. Despite the sudden and swift attack, Kusha barely managed to interrupt no less than 3 separate techniques the Hokage had tried to perform in those first moments. He personally could only recognize 2 of them as the Kawarimi, and some variation of a clone technique. The third was a complete unknown. The Hokage's eyes widened in shock as he felt his techniques fail. He swiftly came to the conclusion that the bijou was responsible for that, though for the life of him he couldn't imagine how it could be accomplished. He tried to activate the warning seals located around the office, but that chakra pulse too was disrupted. Abandoning that approach, he paused to take stock of his situation. He quickly noted with some surprise that he did not feel any pain despite the tailed beast chakra that was holding him against the wall. His mouth was still free, as well. "You won't get away with this," he said, his voice filled with equal parts anger and conviction. "Even if you kill me, the other ninja in the village will fight you. And you are still missing the point, old man," Kusha growled. "You are completely powerless, yet still alive. If I am capable of defeating you in any fashion, do you honestly believe there is a single ninja in this entire village I couldn't take? In any other village? How many times have I been this close to you, or even closer? How many times could I have killed you before this? How many times could I have killed someone else?" Kusha pulled back his yuki slowly and deliberately, easing the Hokage to the floor. The Hokage stared at him as he did so, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. Kusha shook his head. "You refuse to believe my words, so if this doesn't convince you that I am perfectly capable of harming this village and have chosen not to, then nothing will," he said, settling back into his seat. "So I ask again, what will it be, Hokage? Are you going to accept that you can work with me, or shall we begin a battle that will result in my banishment and the destruction of this village?" The Hokage slowly straightened up and moved back to his desk, noting that, other than the overturned chair, no damage had been caused by the bijou's attack. He slowly picked up his chair and set it back on its feet before sitting down. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the desk and his hands laced together in front of his mouth, as he simply observed the bijou in contemplative silence. Kusha forced himself to wait even as he began wondering if he had pushed too far. He was playing a very dangerous game, since he was trying to convince the Hokage he had no intention of destroying Konoha without giving the Hokage enough ammunition to call his bluff. He needed to gain the upper hand in some fashion, but he was all too aware that the combined might of Konoha would eventually overwhelm his defenses. He could outlast any one ninja, or even a group of them. All of them would be able to muster more than enough firepower to penetrate his yuki and destroy his human body, thus banishing him from the human realm. "What is your name?" the Hokage asked finally, his voice neutral once again. Kusha relaxed slightly. "Kushu," he replied. That the Hokage was asking this now showed that the old man was finally accepting him as an individual to converse with and understand rather than an abstract threat to be studied and negated. Or so he hoped, anyway. "Kushu," the Hokage repeated slowly. "What do you want, long term?" "I want to find and free my brethren, and prevent anyone from ever sealing us again." The Hokage nodded slowly. Given what he now knew, assuming that Kusha's words were at least mostly honest, anyway, that answer was to be expected. And you do not intend to seek revenge on the people who have sealed you and your brethren? Now that's an interesting question, Kusha said, smiling slightly. I'm sure that you mean Konoha and the other ninja villages, but that's a mistake. The Hokage frowned thoughtfully. What do you mean? While the hidden villages may take credit for defeating the tailed beasts, you were not the ones who originally attacked us and sealed us. That particular distinction goes to a group known as Akatsuki. The hidden villages don't matter in the end, but Akatsuki I will wipe from existence. The hidden villages would also have their price to pay, but they were a mere nuisance compared to the real threat of Akatsuki. Akatsuki was the group that had created the seals in the first place, the group that had sealed his brethren. Once he and the rest of the Bijou were free and Akatsuki destroyed, then they would consider the fate of the elemental nations. And really, after how useful Konoha had proven to be, he couldn't muster much anger towards the village anymore. That Ino wouldn't like it was, of course, the deciding factor. What his brethren wanted was far more important than meaningless, if satisfying, destruction. Suna, on the other hand, had no such protection. The only question was whether Ryuta would handle it himself or allow his brethren to participate. I've never heard of this. Akatsuki, the Hokage said slowly. If they were the ones responsible, is it not possible that they were wiped out when you destroyed your seal the first time? I'm sure at least some of them were, Kusha replied, but I have come across information that the group survived, or has reformed and become active once more in the years since. What information? The Hokage asked. Kusha shook his head. I don't think we've reached the point where we can fully trust each other yet, unless you want to ask my earlier question about how the summoned tribes were able to talk to you. The Hokage inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the point. Another time, perhaps, he replied. So, your attention is focused on this Akatsuki as the group responsible? Yes. And you are willing to forgive Konoha for attacking you? His mouth twisted around the words as if they had a bitter taste. Kusha shrugged. Honestly, my situation is not without its benefits, and knowing what I know now, I can understand why you reacted as you did, even if you were mistaken in your beliefs. I would not say that I have forgiven or forgotten, but I have no need or desire to seek further retribution from this village. Then I think, the Hokage said slowly, that we may be able to come to an understanding. I'm glad to hear that, Kusha said honestly. Our mutual destruction would have benefited no one but our enemies. The Hokage grimaced, but nodded. So what now? Kusha asked. I need time to think on everything we have discussed so far. I am willing to trust you to a point, but I will verify as much as I can. Of course, Kusha said, waving off the Hokage's words. Just as I will be watching carefully to make sure you do not change your mind once I am away from the village on some mission. The Hokage smirked. I won't claim that the thought didn't occur to me, he admitted. There's something else you should keep in mind, Hokage, Kusha said slowly, teasingly. You may be aware of the potential consequences of making me an enemy, but you should also consider the benefits of becoming my ally. I find that work as a ninja can be highly entertaining, and am inclined to continue as such for the foreseeable future. The Hokage nodded slowly. That is indeed something to consider, he admitted. Kusha grinned. And don't forget that my family will need somewhere to stay in the human realm, somewhere friendly and accommodating. Other villages don't treat their Jinchuriki well at all, which makes Konoha rather appealing in contrast, wouldn't you say? The Hokage's eyes widened as he contemplated what Kusha was suggesting. There were risks, quite a few of them, but the potential benefits, in terms of both power and knowledge. Kusha smirked when he saw the Hokage considered his words. So, shall we meet again? Say, in a week? He said, interrupting the Hokage's musings. Yes, that should be sufficient time, the Hokage muttered, shaking off his thoughts. You do realize I'm going to have to reveal your real identity to certain people? Kusha shrugged. If you must. I certainly can't stop you. Just be very careful about who finds out. I may not seek retribution for past events, but I will not tolerate any future attacks on myself or my brethren. I will keep that in mind, the Hokage replied tersely. If anyone asks, we have been discussing your inevitable promotion to Chunin and some additional duties and training that you may take on, with the potential for fast-tracking you to ANBU. I asked you to keep the exact details to yourself, but you are free to share that much. As far as ANBU are concerned, we discussed that topic in addition to some recent developments in your condition that I wanted to let you know about privately. He deactivated the seals protecting the office before he continued. Make sure you think carefully on what I've said, Naruto-kun, he said for the benefit of the people outside the office. It's an important decision and you should consult with your family and teammates before committing yourself to anything. I understand, Hokage-ji-san, Kusha replied solemnly. Thank you for this opportunity. He turned and opened the door, revealing the ANBU clustered nearby. Of course, Naruto-kun, the Hokage said pleasantly, smiling. If his smile was a little strained and didn't quite reach his eyes, no one noticed. Anytime. July 23rd, 347 NE-5:00 p.m. Yamanaka residence. What did the Hokage want to talk about? Ino asked once Kusha had returned home. He'd come across some new information regarding the state of the seal, Kusha replied, giving Ino a significant look. Ino blinked for a moment before she paled. Is everything all right? We had a frank discussion about things. It's hard to say right now, but I think everything will work out favorably, he said. Ino nodded shakily, the color slowly returning to her face. That's good, she said finally. All sorts of questions were swimming through her head, but she was mindful of their surroundings. Any open discussions would have to wait until they could retreat to their training ground, since that was the only place they felt comfortable using the mind delve. Naruto could wake them should anyone approach, and if anyone was curious they could simply claim to be taking a break or napping. By the way, she said suddenly, changing the subject, after you left, Temari mentioned the idea of taking another tour tomorrow, by which she means she wants to hang out with us. I don't think they have many friends back in Suna, Ino admitted, looking pensive. They probably don't, given their situation. Anyway, that sounds like a good idea. In fact, that will give me the chance to have that talk with Gaara that I wanted to have today. I'll need your help to keep his siblings occupied for as long you can while we have our chat. Of course, Ino replied.